This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Right, hello. Don't tell anyone, but that news bulletin there contained the new price of a stamp. I was planning to do that as a bit of a sort of hook and tease a little bit later in the programme, so I'm going to wait until you've forgotten don't tell anyone else listening what the answer to, because I'm going to, yeah? All right. Hello. Did you have a nice weekend? I can't believe how middle-aged I am becoming when it comes to sunny weekends. The first thoughts I have in my head involve the garden. When did that happen? Oh, do you know what? This might be a lovely weekend to treat the patio. I'll get the power washer out and then I'll treat the patio. I've got to seal the patio stones. It's a newish patio. When did that happen? How did that happen? That doesn't feel like that long ago. And Sunday lunchtime would come around and I hadn't been to bed since Friday night. Anyway, those days are long behind me. And you know what happens on Monday morning, particularly when I have had a restful weekend. I don't think I win any prizes today for seeing links between stories. Check this out, all right? I've got 4 separate stories in front of me with 4 separate headlines. IDF raised Gaza borderland to create kill zone. This comes from that well-known cabal of anti-Semitism. It comes from former IDF soldiers saying they were ordered, or I beg your pardon, not even former, Israeli combatants who've said they were ordered to destroy homes, factories and farmland roughly half a mile inside the perimeter of Gaza to make a, quotes, buffer zone, end quotes, with one describing the area as looking like Hiroshima. So some of the first accounts by Israeli soldiers to be published since the latest war started in October 2023, after Hamas's hideous attack upon Israel, upon that music festival. The group Breaking the Silence, itself founded in 2004 by Israeli veterans, have collated the evidence. A British newspaper has subsequently spoken to 4 of the soldiers, the Guardian newspaper, who corroborated the account. So no, I'll say that again. Israeli Defence Force combatants giving this evidence. So you might want to put your ludicrous accusations of anti-Semitism or bias in the back pocket for a couple of minutes, unless you're prepared, of course, to direct them at IDF conscripts. So headline number 1, IDF raised Gaza borderland, raised with a Z, to create kill zone. Story number 2, IDF changes story of lethal attack on Gaza paramedics after video footage found. This refers to a story we covered, and we were not alone in the UK media, but I think it's fair to say some people seemed more excited by the genealogy of a teenage presenter of a BBC programme than they did by the killing of 15 paramedics working in the Gaza Strip. They said that they'd opened fire. The Israeli Defence Forces said that they'd opened fire on the convoy of medics because they had been acting suspiciously without headlights or emergency signals. Well, guess what? They have found... Just focus on these words for a minute, will you? They found some footage in the pocket on the phone of a dead man. I think we could probably... you can put it in quotes if you want, describe the man as a murdered paramedic. It shows a red fire engine and clearly marked ambulances driving at night using headlights and flashing emergency lights. If that phone had not been found in that poor soul's pocket, the IDF would still be claiming that they had opened fire because the vehicles were moving suspiciously or moving in the darkness. This vehicle stops beside another that has driven off the road. 2 men get out to examine the stopped vehicle. So they are examining the attacked vehicle containing their colleagues. Gunfire erupts and the screen goes blank. 15 Palestinian paramedics and rescue workers, including at least 1 UN employee, were killed in Rafah on the 23rd of March. The UN has subsequently said that Israeli forces shot the men one by one and then buried them in a mass grave. But hey-ho, presenter of a BBC documentary, had a dad who worked in the civil service, which by definition means that he has to be a member of Hamas. Big story, that. Huge. The IDF said the incident was still under investigation, that all claims, including the documentation circulated about the incident, will be thoroughly and deeply examined to understand the sequence of events and the handling of the situation. The word they're using at the moment is mistaken. I wonder what word you would use to describe that. I love you, John. Everyone's going to pick a hole in something. And John's gone first this morning. It's genealogy, not genealogy. You're absolutely right. I always get that one wrong, but there we go. Oh, and here it is. Here comes Roger. James is going on an anti-Israel rant. Hamas started it. There's only one N in Hamas, Roger. The Gaza population supported them. So Roger finds himself in favour of the apparent execution of 15 paramedics this morning, which is a strange place to find yourself on a Monday, Rog, but on you go, because I haven't finished yet. The other story, of course, involves the leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, siding with Israel. So that would be the country that is currently mistaken about the killing of 15 paramedics, putting out a version of events that appears never to have happened, which some people might call a barefaced lie, but which Kemi Badenoch calls the actions of an ally. 2 Labour MPs, elected parliamentarians, Abdeslam Mohammed and Yuan Yang, I think she used to work for the Financial Times, detained by immigration authorities on their way to the West Bank and sent back to the UK. Do you know what for? Because the authorities thought that they might say something bad. The authorities thought that they might say some hate speech. That's a thought crime, right? I'm going to punish you, in this case, deportation or refusing entry. I'm going to punish you now because of something that I think you might say. I'm just going to wait for a second for all the free speech warriors to pipe. Kemi Badenoch's a big one for free speech, right? She's always telling us that our free speech is under threat. So she'll be here in a minute to absolutely rail furiously against 2 elected parliamentarians being punished for something that somebody said they might say one day. Extraordinary. And on she goes, the woman who never makes gaffes, the woman who never has to clarify because she never makes any mistakes, has essentially sided with the foreign regime, which has banned 2 elected members of our sovereign parliament from even entering the country. Her quote is, "Countries should be able to control their borders." I don't believe she said anything yet about the Venezuelan man picked up off the streets in the United States of America and deported to a foreign prison despite not being the bloke that they thought he was and not having done anything wrong. She also echoes that line about anybody pointing out what we are describing here, including the Israel Defense Force's own admission of a, quotes, mistake, end quotes, when it comes to the killing of the last 15 Palestinian paramedics to be killed in that war zone. She describes anybody citing these stories as promoting Hamas propaganda. She's Roger's friend. There you go. That's where people like Roger get this sort of stuff from. The idea that describing the deaths, the death toll, the reality, the, quotes, mistakes, end quotes, or, if you prefer, barefaced lies, is somehow parroting Hamas propaganda. So there's 3 headlines for you there. IDF raised Gaza border land to create kill zone. That's the testimony of actual Israeli soldiers, essentially describing what I think we could all agree is at least pretty close to being ethnic cleansing. They've changed the story of the last, and goodness knows how many stories like this there have been. We spoke to the father last Friday of a former Royal Marine who's still waiting to find out the truth about the circumstances of his son's death as he accompanied an aid convoy in that part of the world. Nothing broke over the weekend. You won't be surprised to hear. No major breakthroughs there. So the IDF has changed its story of the lethal attack on Gaza. Paramedics, the people Roger really hates, the people in ambulances trying to bring medical aid to one of the most blighted corners of the globe, down with that sort of thing. Why not shoot them? They deserve it, says Roger. IDF raised Gaza borderland to create kill zone. IDF changes story of lethal attack on Gaza paramedics after video footage found. Badenoch sides with Israel. Badenoch sides with Israel as Labour MPs are refused entry. What's the word for that? When you side with a foreign regime over your own parliamentary compatriots, is there a word for that? Has that happened before? Can you remember another example of that happening? A senior, very, very senior British politician well, I suppose Priti Patel did it, didn't she, in a way, when she didn't tell her own prime minister that she was having secret meetings with it was the Israelis again, with a foreign government. Kemi Badenoch publicly siding with them against her own parliamentary colleagues, elected British parliamentarians. That got me more in the sense of now having become not inured, you should never be inured, but should we say used to the atrocities being visited upon Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip. Become used to it, not inured to it, but unsurprised, unshocked by it. I was shocked by the leader of the opposition, even with her long history of struggling to take her foot out of her mouth for more than a minute at a time. Even with that remarkable history, the idea that the leader of the opposition would look at these events and decide to side with the foreign nation that has punished your parliamentary colleagues, your elected parliamentary colleagues. Richard Fuller, a Conservative front bencher, said yesterday any member of parliament who goes on an official trip should be, I would think, welcomed in any country. Richard Fuller, that well-known lefty who currently sits on the Conservative front bench, saying, I would think we should be welcomed in any country. Of course we should. Of course they should. And weirdly, I was thinking what would happen if a Democrat president had crashed the a global economy in the way that Donald Trump has done, and locked up an or sent an entirely innocent man to a foreign jail and made no efforts at all to bring him back. If a Democrat president had done that, what would the British media have been doing? What would the US media, I beg your pardon, have been doing? Could you imagine if a Labour leader, I don't even think Jeremy Corbyn would have been this cack-handed had things been reversed. A Labour leader coming out and saying, I think it's right that my parliamentary colleagues have been refused entry into a foreign country that is supposed to be our ally. Unbelievable. Is there a word for that sort of thing? Siding with the foreign regime against your own elected party? I can't quite put my finger on it. I don't know why I've got the word, the letter T is popping up in my mind, but it'll come to me, I'm sure. And then the fourth headline, which is a rather different story. Splits over war in Gaza, a national security risk. And this focuses upon young British Muslims becoming more disillusioned and isolated. But I can tell you with a cursory glance at my inbox that this is not confined to young British Muslims. I suppose, in a sense, the prospect of potential radicalisation or extremism is more likely to fester among people who have a fellow feeling with the victims of these atrocities, this ethnic cleansing, these hideous acts. But humanity can be a fellow feeling. I would say that many humans are growing disillusioned and isolated because of the Middle East conflict and the government's failure to do anything that might appear to be helpful in this field. I said to you a long time ago that this would, if Benjamin Netanyahu was not in some way stopped or prevented or put on the trial that he's so desperate to avoid, that this hideous conflict would boil down into two camps. Well, there's more than two camps. There's a heck of a lot of people who don't know much about what's going on, some of whom feel compelled to have pungent opinions, like our friend Roger, and some of whom don't, some of whom have a more honest and logical response, which is a sort of form of weird moral ambivalence. But for people who are invested in it and moderately informed, there have only ever been two types of people discussing this. People who would excuse absolutely anything that Israel did, a position I have in the past explained my understanding of. Understanding something is not the same as sympathising. Empathising, perhaps, but not sympathising. So there will be people who will excuse every single thing that Israel does, and then there will be people who won't. And that is a division that has nothing to do with ethnicity, with religion, with geography, with politics. It has nothing to do with any of the areas of division and sectarianism that peppered this story, like Blackpool through a stick of rock. I'll say it again, there are two types of people. People who will excuse everything that Netanyahu's regime does, and people who won't. There are millions of people around the world who are incredibly loyal to the state of Israel and who are quite possibly of the Jewish faith, who are in the second category. They will not excuse every single thing that Netanyahu does. But we're here now. I wish we'd never got here. I wish, once again, how many times have I said this to you? I wish I'd been wrong. But I remember taking the early calls after that hideous terror attack on October the 7th, and when the word proportionate first appeared in our pontifications, and I began to wonder what it meant. And I realised, because I was speaking to people, that there was no limit to what some people were going to be prepared to sanction and support. UK media is full of people who never, ever, ever consider anything Israel has done to be wrong, up to and including killing 15 Palestinian paramedics and apparently lying about it and refusing entry into the country of 2 elected British parliamentarians. I haven't got a question for you yet, and that's deliberate. I want you to have a think about what we've just told you. I want you to reflect upon a number of things, not least why you won't be hearing much of this coverage over much of the UK media. In fact, as I've mentioned a couple of times, you'll be hearing more about the teenage presenter of a BBC documentary than you will about 15 dead Palestinians, the father of a dead Royal Marine, the absolute reversal of story, for want of a better word, by the IDF, the razing to the ground, according to Israeli soldiers, of land within Gaza, and the leader of the opposition deciding to side with the regime that's done all of those things against her own parliamentary colleagues. And then when we come back, I'll have a question for you.
James O'Brien on LBC.
2 minutes after 10 is the time, and the question becomes quite simple, really, doesn't it? Benjamin Netanyahu is arriving at the White House today, if he hasn't already, a man for whom the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant. Hungary had to leave, of course, the auspices of that court in order to welcome Netanyahu to Budapest last week. The United States of America isn't in it, so he can arrive with impunity in Washington, D.C. The first foreign leader, I think, to visit Washington since Donald Trump set fire to the global economy. But we are not talking about that second bit today, at least not for now, and possibly not all morning. We're talking about... I need to phrase this carefully because there's no pleasure in being proved right. But the tension between those two camps, people who will excuse anything. You remember when I used to say, how many is too many? We have to respond. We have to retaliate. And perhaps even we need revenge. I said, well, how much would be too much? 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people? 40,000? 50,000, which is where we are now, to which, of course, some people respond by saying those are Hamas's figures and they can't be trusted, and then stick their fingers in their ear when you say, oh, okay, can I send some journalists there to do their own research and their own counting? Maybe send some parliamentarians, if not to Gaza, then to the West Bank, just to get the light. No, they're not allowed to come into this country. We're sending them home because they might say something we don't like. And the free speech warriors fall silent. So the reason I have to phrase it slightly carefully because there is absolutely no pleasure in seeing what we feared would happen. And that is the distillation of the entire divide down to people who will excuse absolutely anything. People for whom the Israeli regime can do no wrong. They can do no wrong. And people for whom they just can. People who believe passionately in the modern state of Israel, in its unique historical status, its unique humanitarian status, in the necessity of its surviving, ideally in a state of harmony, but who recognize that governments and politicians are human beings, and some human beings can do terrible things. And there is no scarf, there is no cloak, there is no ethnicity, no religion, no political party, no banner under which you march, which excuses you from the accusation of having done terrible things, the reality of having done terrible things. There is no loyalty so blind that we would excuse absolutely anything being done by, quotes, our side, end quotes. And then there are the people whose loyalty is blind, who can't, in some cases for reasons I understand, in some cases for reasons that terrify me, who honestly don't believe there should be or can be any limit at all to what Israel can and is doing to Palestinian people. 25 minutes after 10. So that brings us to the question. How much damage has this done to Israel? Peter makes a good point. Every time Israel does something like this, Hamas and Iran must be absolutely delighted as Israel's reputation and support internationally diminishes still further. Again, if you recognize the necessity of the modern state of Israel's survival in its unique place in humanitarian history, this is heartbreaking. He wonders whether this was Hamas's and Iran's plan all along. I don't think it was. I think Netanyahu's response continues to be unhinged for very, very personal political reasons. It's got nothing to do with the big picture and everything to do with A, political survival, and B, staying out of court and ultimately staying out of prison. But of course, if you're blindly loyal to the regime, none of that matters, any more than the lives of 15 murdered Palestinian paramedics matter. or I beg pardon, accidentally killed and then mistakenly reported and described. So that's the question that I want. I mean, there is a story today about young British Muslims being more disillusioned than ever. We know that the Labour Party literally lost seats at the last general election that would once have been absolutely guaranteed victories because people felt in those constituencies, largely Muslim constituencies, but this is by no means a uniquely Muslim issue. They felt that the Labour Party had abandoned the Palestinian cause, had abandoned the people of Palestine. But it won't be confined to, as I've said, any religion, any ethnicity, any section of society. This question of how much damage has been done now. How big do you think that constituency can be? How small can it get? The people that will excuse anything. And in that constituency, extraordinarily, sits Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. So that's the question I've got for you, okay? How much damage has now been done to the Israeli cause by this specific Israeli government? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. Ifti's in Newcastle. Ifti, what do you reckon?
Good morning, James. First, I'd like to say something about what you asked about Kemi Badenoch. And the word I think you were looking for was treason.
Well, I don't know if it is. It might have been, but because she's not acted against the interests of this nation, has she? Or has she, by siding with a foreign regime?
I think she's acted against the interests of the people of this nation. Because any backlash, any people who feel disenfranchised, marginalised, angry, revengeful against the British establishment often fly off the handle and commit to acts that are or atrocities that damage the people.
So you're accusing her of you're accusing her of potentially radicalising people.
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Of course. As is Israel. Yeah.
Okay, and so do preachers and imams and various.
Yeah, of course, and so do people from the churches, and so do the Church of the Ku Klux Klan, and they have done for many years.
Okay, I mean treason's pushing it, but I understand where you're coming from. And obviously, when I was flirting with the T word, it was treason or treachery actually, which is a slightly different thing because treason is a criminal act, isn't it? Whereas treachery is a slightly more nebulous concept. But it seems extraordinary to me that the leader of His Majesty's opposition can see a foreign regime accuse elected parliamentarians of thought crimes and then side with the punishment. How much damage do you think has been done, and broadly? I think her purpose was to mitigate the damage, any perceived damage that was as Israel has caused itself. However, I just want to draw your attention to a speech by a journalist in the last few days, 21-year-old Abdi Mohammed. You've got 14 seconds to do it in.
He basically said, and this is when I don't agree with your thing that this division isn't about race or politics or whatever, etc., etc. Sure. He basically said that if this was 15 Ukrainian paramedics, or blue-eyed people, then the whole world response, the Western world response would have been markedly different. And I believe that to be the case.
I think it would have been a year ago, but I'm afraid that the bombs dropping and the people being killed in Ukraine now don't get anything like that. I agree with the central thrust of that point. But I'm afraid there's an atrocity fatigue that kicks in, and a lot of the stuff that is now happening long after the deadline by which Donald Trump promised to have delivered a ceasefire, a lot of that is not getting anything like the attention it would have got a year ago. But even then, I think you're right that attacks upon Ukraine would have got very different responses from attacks upon Gaza. I have to remind you, Ifti, and perhaps the journalist that you're referring to, that the attacks upon Ukraine were not in retaliation for an attack upon Russia. It was an imperialist land grab. And at least in the aftermath of October the 7th, the response was justified and necessary. The point at which it ceased to be either of those things is, of course, debatable. So there's the question. How much damage has been done to Israel's cause? What happens if and when a new prime minister arrives, when Israel has new leadership and they seek to re-establish credibility on the world stage, whether Benjamin Netanyahu is languishing in jail or not? What happens? when this catalogue of atrocity, this clear programme of ethnic cleansing, this absolutely hideous history of doing things like making mistakes with regard to how 15 paramedics were killed, despite releasing statements that turned out to have absolutely no basis in truth. What has been done? Israeli strikes on Gaza yesterday, perhaps to support Ifti's point, killed at least 44 people. Another Red Crescent worker on the mission is still missing. The Israeli military, as we heard last week, have been asked for his whereabouts. And one survivor of the incident said that he saw the colleague, the Red Crescent worker, Nasara, by the name of Asad al-Nasara, being led away blindfolded by Israeli troops, despite, this footage has now established, having been part of a medical convoy that was clearly flashing its lights and using its emergency illuminations. It's 10:31. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:35 is the time, so it is a question of change, really. And I think that point I just made about Ukraine was quite depressing, wasn't it? In that inevitably, it's part of the human condition. In the early days of the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia, it dominated the news agenda. And then, I don't know if you realise it's still the same war, but the refugee project that was largely self-starting, it didn't have much government leadership, but it was something that British citizens were free to contribute to and help. And any suggestion that similar hospitality be extended to people, Palestinian people fleeing hideous bombardments, was greeted with derision in some quarters and outright hatred. So there is obviously truth in the comparison. But what I want to know today is whether or not I'm living in cloud cuckoo land when I imagine minds changing. So I don't know what date you want to pick in the aftermath of that terror attack, the October the 7th being, if you like, the starting point, and that question of when will too much, when will the response become too much, when would it cease to be proportionate? I don't know if you're looking at November the 7th, 1,195 people killed that day by Hamas, 736 of whom were Israeli civilians. A month later, 2 months later, 3 months later, as the death toll climbs, as the families of the hostages still held become increasingly disillusioned and publicly critical of Netanyahu's government, and then as the unthinkable begins to happen, the things that, if they'd happened on October the 8th or October the 9th, we'd have been unanimous in our condemnation. You can't go around blowing up ambulances. You can't go around razing the land to the ground in order to destroying people's homes just to create so-called buffer zones. If journalists had been on the ground in Gaza, much of this would never have been permitted to happen. But of course, they're not allowed to be on the ground. International journalists can't get in there, and the ones that can, they can't get in there. They're not allowed to. They're sending parliamentarians back from the airport. Chances of getting into Gaza, they were only going to the West Bank. The chances of getting into Gaza are absolutely zero. So that idea that this has been a process of increment, we'll get away with this and then we'll get away with that, and it culminates in impunity. It culminates in a point where a regime, whichever regime it is, can do absolutely anything. It's like an entire country is having a Donald Trump on Fifth Avenue moment. I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. Now, objectivity is such a valuable faculty. So to be able to sit here and refuse, as we have done from the very start of this nightmare, to feel more sorrow for the death of a Jewish baby than a Palestinian baby, to feel more horror at the needless killing of a Palestinian civilian than we do at the needless killing of a Jewish or an Israeli civilian. It's easy for me to do, but I appreciate it's not easy for others. And that's not a boast from me. It's just an acknowledgement of a degree of detachment, and objectivity demands a degree of detachment. But it means I've got this idea in my head that people who would have been full-throated supporters of the necessity of Israel responding to that terror attack on October the 8th, October the 9th, November the 7th, November the 8th, November the 9th, maybe well into the following year, maybe well into the beginning even perhaps of this year. But do those minds ever change? 0345 6060 973. The ones that used to ring me and get very cross when I asked how many deaths would be too many, because they'd never really asked, and I want to sound unkind, I don't think people had ever really asked themselves that question before. How many deaths would be too many? And they suddenly realised that they were going to have to either argue with me, prevaricate, obfuscate, hang up, or admit that they couldn't conceive of a figure being too high. They'd say one death is too many. And I'd say, well, we've already had 10,000. So that doesn't really work as a rhetorical response to my question. How many would be too many? Is that just everyone? I mean, is it footballification? Is this position of objectivity, this refusal to feel more regret, more horror, more sorrow at the death of one than the death of another? Is that just weird? I don't know. I just know that we need to talk about this today. We absolutely need to talk about this today. Mustafa is in Reading. Mustafa, what would you like to say?
Well, James, you've been warning about this. I mean, I've been listening to you over the course of the last, 18 months or more now, and you said it many a times, how much is too much, and it has been incremental. But something like this, when you've got lifesavers, these are people who are dedicated to save people, for them to be targeted in such a way and systematically annihilated, and then for that crime to be covered up, and then for that to be lied about. Let's be frank, it was lied about initially.
We can't. That is, I think, a perfectly reasonable reading of the known facts. Just to be clear, it is not proven yet, but it is a perfectly reasonable reading of the known facts. And it can certainly be stated that, at the very least, a lot of mystery hangs over the question of how people could have seen things that never happened when offering up their explanations for these killings.
Yeah, and if it wasn't for that mobile phone footage being uncovered, this would have been, another instance, another massacre that would have, basically, we would have had to take the line put out by the IDF unquestionably.
They were shielding Hamas operatives. They hadn't turned their emergency lights on. They were up to no good. Everybody's guilty until proven innocent. And this phone in this fellow's pocket, I mean, it's heartbreaking in its simplicity. But there it is.
Heartbreaking. He's making dua. He's making a supplication in his final moment. He knows what's going to come to him. He knows what's going to happen. I suppose the only thing about it is, in those final moments, is going in the knowledge that his intention was not to do something bad. He wasn't going out for anything other than to go and save life. So his last action was to go and save life. He died doing that, or he was killed doing that. And I think it's highly, I mean, I'm not pro-Israel by any means, but this is, for their sakes, this is highly damaging. And for them then to make, excuses like, we had to cover the bodies in sand to prevent the dogs eating them. That's horrific in its sense. But then why the ambulances? Did you think that the dogs were going to chew at the ambulances?
And of course, witnesses reporting people being tied up as well, which rather adds to the air of what we'll very euphemistically call mystery. But I don't know that I've asked this question before. And you're right, some of these questions I've been asking for well over a year. How much will too much be? But how many pendulum swing, do you think? How hard would it be to go from horror at the October the 7th attack, justified horror and deep conviction that response must be bloody and it must be immediate? Moral nuances aside, that is a human reaction, a thirst for retaliation, if not revenge. If you felt that then, is it possible, do you think, to feel horror now at what is being done by the Israeli regime?
Right from the outset, there was this kind of bated breath as to what the reaction's going to be. How far will this go? Because we all knew there was going to be a reaction. Yes. And how
and I would still say there had to be a reaction. You can't sit back and let things like that happen to your people challenged.
There was but then how far? And now it's becoming apparent with everything that Trump is saying, etc. It's really, for someone who's following this, it's you can see they want to retake all of Gaza. There's this talk of, actual open talk of ethnically cleansing a whole population, and unashamedly, openly talking about this. And there's no how can I say, there's no kind of fear of any political repercussions or anything. But I honestly believe that, ordinary people are repulsed by this notion to say that, to take it to that far, to collectively punish 2.2 million people. I mean, I'm seeing pictures of babies without their heads. Literally, it's horrific what we're seeing. And it's...
But who is seeing those pictures? I mean, if you were relying on the UK media, you'd know more about the teenage presenter of a BBC documentary than you do about the 15 dead paramedics.
I'm afraid, I mean, I'll use the term, but people are being radicalised by social media, It's been happening for a year, but just seeing stuff on TikTok. And when I say radicalised, James, I mean they are looking at what they see presented, say, on the BBC. We have to shield our children from seeing things. And then they turn to their phones and they see the raw footage of what's actually happening. So this then creates a distrust as to what are we being told.
BBC does a fairly good job in this space. I just, in my personal opinion,
criticism from both sides.
Yes.
That's true. But also, I have to say, on this particular incident, I mean, your opening on this was like, I think you did use the term lie, and I think for the first few hours I was looking and all the headlines were kind of, appears to be, or,
Well, that's the difference. Well, I picked up you, I think, or a previous caller, on the difference between something that is proven and something is not. So your interpretation of the facts that are currently available seems to me to be perfectly reasonable, but it's not proven. And it's why I no longer have a particular problem with people using the word genocide, but it's not, or attempted genocide, but it's not a legally binding phrase until the International Criminal Court's investigations are complete. And that brings us back to the Oval Office, of course, where Benjamin Netanyahu is either currently or set to be feted by Donald Trump, a man who is facing allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court, including starvation of civilians and extermination. And that's Kemi Badenoch's guy. I don't know if we've got time today to move on to that side of the story, but that's Kemi Badenoch's guy. You have got a political leader of a foreign regime facing allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court, including starvation of civilians and extermination, not to mention all manner of accusations on the domestic political stage. And today we learn that Israeli military are queuing up to reveal that they were charged with raising huge swathes of land inside the perimeter of Gaza with orders to turn the area into a kill zone. And that's the guy Kemi Badenoch is siding with against parliamentary colleagues. Thank you, Mustafa. Gary's in Finchley. Gary, we'll talk to Gary after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
2:11 is the time, and the question is a horrible one. But as the evidence mounts that that there is no limit upon what the Israeli regime will do in Gaza, and therefore quite possibly beyond, how much damage does it do internationally to the reputation of the country? And in many ways, it's not fair. I mean, you wouldn't want the whole of the United Kingdom to be judged, and this is a much more trivial parallel, by the actions of Liz Truss, would you? But that is the way the world works. That's how we look to the outside world. We are, in many ways, our leadership. And this leadership has now been shown to have undertaken an almost uncountable number of atrocities. Just today alone, I'm looking at 3 stories. Today alone, let me make that absolutely clear. Today alone, I'm looking at stories about Israeli combatants saying they were ordered to destroy homes, factories and farmland, roughly half a mile inside the perimeter of Gaza. No pretense there that it's about rescuing hostages. It is entirely about cleansing the area and creating what one Israeli combatant has described a latter-day Hiroshima. We know that the IDF has, quotes, backtracked, quotes, on its account of how 15 Palestinian medics were killed last month. They had to backtrack because footage emerged in the pockets of a murdered man that completely contradicted its claims that the vehicles they were in did not have emergency signals on when the troops opened fire. So you don't undertake an action like that unless you're being appallingly led by your officers, or unless you know that there will be no consequences in the event of the truth ever emerging. And then we've got the leader of the opposition siding with the regime, led by the man who is facing all sorts of allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court, up to and including starvation of civilians and, quotes, extermination, end quotes, a word that might apply to the events involving the 15 paramedics. I don't know what the technicalities of that vocabulary are, but Kemi Badenoch has decided to side with that regime against two of her own parliamentary colleagues, essentially accused of thought crimes by Israel, because had they been allowed to enter the West Bank, they might have said what I believe free speech warriors like to describe as hurty words. But I don't know where they all are at the moment. They seem notable only by their silence. Gary is in Finchley. Gary, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello,
James, can we... this is really important stuff. Can we prioritise the three things that you've picked out? So can I prioritise them? Do you mind? I do that?
I don't know what you're going to say, so I can neither approve nor disapprove in advance.
So I think the MPs, given that the MPs were just going to go and do a report, it's really of no interest that they got banned or didn't get banned. To the number of people who are likely to be killed. No, I understand. I'm talking about to the number of people who might get hurt or killed or whatever.
I mean, in terms of domestic politics, there's nothing more important than the leader of the opposition siding with a regime that is punishing British parliamentarians for thought crimes.
I'm trying to, which I think you're doing as well, is focus on the deaths and the war in Gaza. So it's always slightly wary when people come on and ask questions I can't answer about. Do you approve? Do you disapprove of this? The phone-in is about the loss of credibility or support for a regime that is doing various things, and that includes killing 15 paramedics and apparently lying about it. It includes Israeli combatants queuing up to tell us about this so-called kill zone, this latter-day Hiroshima. And then because I'm a British radio presenter, I consider it highly important that the leader of the opposition has decided to side with the perpetrators of those acts against her own parliamentary colleagues. So that's why the question was really simply put, how much support do you think Israel is losing? And I think it'd be respectful to everybody else who's been listening for 52 minutes for you to have a crack at answering that. It's obvious. I am answering it. It obviously is losing respect, but I think the amount of respect it's losing because the MPs have been not allowed in.
No, that's about Kemi Badenoch. So talk to me about Israel. You don't have to mention Kemi Badenoch again.
Right. So the second issue is the barrier, or the Hiroshima-like barrier that has been created around Gaza, inside Gaza, and that will have, I guess, a military perspective. There will be some military people in Israel who have said the way to stop Hamas and other terrorists from approaching Israel and doing what they did on October 7th is to have a larger border. And that we can argue about it, but there's a military process. Some high-up military generals have clearly decided that is the case, and I find it unsurprising. But someone else could easily argue that it's ethnic cleansing, and the facts support that as well. You can argue. I don't use the words. I don't know what the ethnic cleansing is. I can see. Well, what it means is if you belong to a certain ethnicity, your house is going to get razed to the ground. And if you belong to a different ethnicity in exactly the same part of the world, but say a mile in the opposite direction, your house is not going to get razed to the ground by the Israeli government. I think what people are trying to do is protect each other. So Israel wants to protect Israelis. If that involves having a larger border around the Gaza Strip, you're right. It could be on the Israeli side. You could have argued it would be on the Israeli side, but it makes sense to put further separation. Why would you not do it on your own territory? No. I'm saying it could have been done on its own territory. Yeah, but why wouldn't you do that? No, James, I'm only saying it's a military perspective. No, and I'm only saying why wouldn't you do it? Because it's a good point that you raise. No. Why wouldn't you do it on your own territory? James, maybe they should have done. Okay? Yeah, but you're speculating about the military rationale for doing it in the first place, so you can at least speculate about the reason why they do it on Palestinian soil, not Israeli soil. Well, if it was me, I would have done it on Israeli soil. You're not an Israeli military leader who you think must have a clear rationale for doing this. You've already put yourself in their shoes. So stay in their shoes. Stay in their shoes. No, stay if you can. Stay in their shoes and tell me why they've done it this way round. They've done it this way round because there is a supposed border with Gaza, which was meant to be protected and people were not meant to cross, and that was sorted. And so when people then come across that border, the Israelis will say, well, why should we give up some of our land for you
It would still be Israeli land.
For us to be protected.
It would still be Israeli land.
No, but they would be giving up half a mile all the way around the border.
It would still be theirs. It would still be theirs. They'd be in charge of the buffer zone as opposed to taking it from...
They'd be in charge of the buffer zone, but they'd be creating their own buffer zone of half a mile.
Yeah.
You're right, James. I don't argue, but can we move to the thing about the
I'm following your agenda here, Gary. If you don't like how it's gone, we're welcome to move on. And now the murdered paramedics.
I wanted to move to the most important thing.
Well, remember, this is the most important thing today. You're supposed to be answering a question that goes right back to October the 7th, 2023.
Okay, but
and it's now 10:58. But you tell me what it is you rang in to say.
The people who killed the Palestinian medics, if they have lied, should be court-martialed. It's a straightforward thing. It's a mistake. If it's a mistake, and then they try to cover up the mistake, straightforward court-martial. Disgusting behaviour.
And how many of those have there been? How many of those? How confident would you be?
We're talking about these three. Let's concentrate on these individual things. Let's concentrate. Right.
But now we're talking about court-martials in response to one of these individual things, and I'm asking for the precedent. How successful or how optimistic would you be if you were the mother of one of these murdered paramedics that a court-martial would happen and that proper sanctions would be in place?
If there's a Supreme Court justice system in Israel, right, an independent judiciary who have come out against Netanyahu on numerous occasions. Israel is a divided country.
That's not what I asked. I asked for examples of these court-martials of which you speak.
Sorry?
I asked for examples of these court-martials of which you speak.
I don't know them, but I know that people.
How can you have confidence in the process then?
Because I know that people have been court-martialed.
Can I have an example? I mean, not just an example.
No,
that's a bit hard. Well, okay. Well, I don't have faith in things that I can't prove exist.
Why are you trying to? Why are you trying to take?
Go on. No, go on that last bit where you said this is what. What were you going to say then?
What?
You just said this is what. Right. What were you going to say then?
You are exacerbating beyond the individual circumstances.
Yes, I'm going back to October the 7th of 2023. I made that clear from 10 o'clock this morning.
Say again?
I'm going back to October the 7th of 2023. I made that clear at 10 o'clock this morning.
Well, you were trying to isolate these three particular things.
Only in the context of the latest developments. Gary, we've isolated the three particular things. You've said that the court-martial response in the event of these lies being proved would be satisfactory. And I wonder how you can say that if you can't persuade yourself, let alone me, that you have faith in that system. And that perhaps is the most powerful point you've made, albeit unintentionally.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11. I can't think of a question with regard to the... you might, if you were listening last week, you might think that I didn't really come up with one last week. What can Starmer do? I think we asked that about 5 different shows, on some shows more than once. Keith suggests we could do What Was It Like? I don't think for once, mate, that works in this context. I mean, the question of whether or not he's got a plan, it's all gone a bit COVID. Boris Johnson during COVID, do you remember that? I told you this already. The early days of COVID, when we were sitting here thinking that the government really didn't have the first idea what it was doing, and we thought, well, no, they must. It can't. It's like a trust normality bias, or a trust, like a sort of infantile trust in politicians. Goodness knows how that can still be sustained after the absolute shower that we've had in recent years. Is there a plan? Is it possible? So I haven't got a question. If I haven't got a question, we haven't got a phone in. I can tell you now that the FTSE has gone vertical this morning, and that's a downward move, you will not be surprised to learn. Truly vertical. I can't remember seeing it quite like that. Down 7 points. I'm told that equates to about 2.5 years more work if you are currently relying upon investments to subsidise your retirement. I mean, things do go back up again, but at the moment that would involve 2.5 years more work in order to reach the point that you would have been at on Friday when your income has reached a place where it's capable of supporting your lifestyle post-retirement. And that's why we're largely on the domestic stage for the rest of the programme, at least as things stand. There's one really strange story that I think might be a little bit too trivial to concern us, but I'm going to keep it in my back pocket, and I may tell you what it is a little later in the programme. Questions like why was there a bloodbath on Asian markets are questions that I don't think we can answer. I can refer you to some interesting articles on that, but I don't think we can get a proper handle on it. What I can tell you is that the government is pressing ahead with a plan. And this is really interesting. I don't know if you've heard this already today. And I think it's going to be really interesting how you respond to the story. So whether you've heard it before or not, just hold fire for me for a minute, okay? That these are only words. Sound like Ronan Keating. These are only words. But they describe an imminent policy. They describe something that the government is set to do, not minded to do, not thinking of doing, but something that the government is going to do. And I can't remember a domestic story that better relayed the power of words more than this one. Because depending on how you view the government, you view authority, you view Keir Starmer, you view Wes Streeting, you view the United Kingdom. And I'm thinking now of people who are either unable to work because of their health or people who are largely sympathetic to people who are unable to work because of their health. Perfectly capable of acknowledging that in any population there will be some lead swingers. But generally speaking, if you're not working and you're living on the relative pittance that the state provides, you probably would rather not be there. And so in that category, in that cohort, the response to this is going to be fascinating. I'm going to decide which headline to use. See, it's really interesting, this. I'm going to give credit to the Daily Telegraph, which I don't often do. Well, its news pages are all right, still. Rather good sometimes. Got some good special correspondence. The health editor today does a great job. Comment pages, absolute skip fire. We haven't done an unhinged headline for a while. Is there an unhinged headline today? Is there, for example, a headline in the Daily Telegraph that says, call me crazy, but I think Donald Trump might be onto something here. We'll check, and I'll get back to you. How much money would you put on there being a headline in the Daily Telegraph that says something like, call me crazy, call me a penguin, but I think Donald Trump, it's not black and white, or something like that. There's one in the Mail that is kind of unhinged, but it's more proving that the Daily Mail is dedicated to finding bitterness and anger in absolutely everything, including things that it likes, than anything else. So I've got that for you, but let's see if we can find an unhinged headline. Ideally in the Telegraph, to strike a lovely contrast with this rather nice headline in the news. But I'm going to give you the Times headline first. Okay, here it is. 10 words. Especially if you are on sick leave, which is a phrase that encompasses a lot of people. You're on sick leave, right? You're not working because you are signed off sick, crucially. What happens when these 10 words reach your brain? Ready? Health workers will make house calls to cut sick leave. Health workers will make house calls to cut sick leave. Just let that settle for a moment. Health workers will make Hello? Could I speak to Mrs. Miggins, please? Yeah, well, she's in bed at the moment, I'm afraid. She had a terrible night. Well, could I possibly come in and have a little chat with her? Hello, Mrs. Miggins. How are we today? Why aren't you at work? I haven't got any legs. Right, I'm exaggerating slightly. And of course, people without legs are perfectly capable of holding down jobs. But you can go one of two ways with that headline. Health workers will make house calls to cut sick leave. The Daily Telegraph's headline is rather longer. And it is this. Health workers sent door to door to bring care to heart of community and tackle sickness crisis. Now that actually, and I never thought I'd get this from a Daily Telegraph headline, that makes my heart swell a bit. That makes me think, because you know how hard we've tried on this programme to identify the hinterland between can't work and won't work, and but not even won't work. We need a third category, don't we? So won't work conjures up images of malingering and faking and lying and dodging, bludging, I think Australians call it. Can't work is probably a smaller constituency than not working. So could work. Can't work, won't work, could work. Brackets, with the right help and support, close brackets. That is the constituency that fascinates me most. Because I think that the second constituency, the won't work, is horribly inflated and exaggerated by the usual suspects. And I think you should know, when I use the phrase the usual suspects, I generally mean people who told you austerity would make you richer, Boris Johnson would be a brilliant prime minister, Liz Truss was an economic genius, Brexit would be brilliant for Britain, and that Donald Trump was a stand-up guy. That's just quite a nice quintet, isn't it, of positions that seem to be held. If you hold one, you hold the other four. So the usual suspects will attempt to persuade you that the sickness benefit bill is dominated by people swinging the lead or taking the mickey. And you can always find someone who knows someone, or even a sort of rogue person who claims to have worked in that sector, and they'll tell you how many skivers and how many scroungers there are. And that's fine. I'm sure they exist. But we're not going to fix this problem by pretending that is everybody. Everybody's in that category. And can't work. People who've got really bad and permanent, not oscillating health conditions. People who will never wake up in the morning and think, I could do a decent day's work today. Some of the woodwork, want to work crew are going to be capable of working on some days and not working on others, which is a huge challenge for an employer, but I would suggest not an insurmountable one. So that's brilliant. Let me just get that. This is from Andrew. Is this the creation of a health Gestapo? I think I actually used the word Stasi when I spoke to Eleanor this morning. Health workers will make house calls to cut sick leave. And that could be a response to the Times headline. But not the Telegraph headline, Andrew. I think you'd concede. Health workers sent door to door to bring care to the heart of the community and tackle sickness crisis. They've done a pilot in Westminster, and they reckon that this pilot shows that a scheme like this could achieve a 10% drop in hospital admissions over a year and a 7% fall in visits to A&E. It would be like the family doctor paying house calls. Supporters of the programme said some people, I don't know which supporters they're quoting here, but they said it's the nanny state on steroids. But they've done it in Brazil and it worked quite well. Be a 10-year plan for the NHS. It would be part of that, and it would help people help themselves. So this to me seems to hinge upon the question of how much faith you have in the government. And it's not just on the right that you'll find people persuaded that Keir Starmer is a latter-day Pol Pot. There are plenty of people on the left still, and I think perpetually licking the wounds of the last leadership, who will be more vituperative and more vicious in their condemnations of the current leadership for committing the unforgivable, unpardonable crime of actually winning a general election than people on the right would be. I don't currently believe that Keir Starmer is a cruel man. I think he's a flawed and fallible man, but I think when he looks at these numbers, when he looks at these figures, he sees a problem that he thinks it's his job to fix. And fixing this problem would involve helping people who want to be helped, helping people who would benefit from help. The problem is, and this is a degree of footballification, that if Ian Duncan Smith had come out with this, I wouldn't believe him. I'd think it was, in his case, an attempt to sort of demonise people who are signed off sick. I have to guard against this. I can't be at the front of the queue of accusing other people of footballification and irrational biases if I don't occasionally acknowledge that I can suffer from them myself. But on this occasion, you hear people like Mel Stride coming out with comments about mental health in particular, and they don't sound as if they are thinking people are in real trouble and they could be in a better place with the right help. They sound as if they think that creeping up behind someone who's got post-traumatic stress disorder and bursting a crisp bag behind their head might somehow shock them into getting out of bed and going to work. I simplify horribly. 2 questions. First off, gut shot response. What is your immediate response to this story? The government wants to send health workers door to door to bring care to the heart of the community and tackle the sickness crisis. So to improve people's health and ideally to get people who could be helped back to work. Supporters compare it to the family doctor paying house calls. How does it, because if Aneurin Bevan had announced this, I think we would be pretty warmly approving of it. If after setting up the NHS, he had a look at people who were suffering from various conditions and thought, well, with the right help, they could get back to work, so they could. Welshman, I think. And because he has this sort of credible compassion, because we think of him as a compassionate and decent man, if he had announced this, we'd think it was a compassionate and decent programme. I don't know how you're going to respond to the news that the current government wants to introduce it. But one of the things it's going to look at is life expectancy, an 18-year difference in life expectancy between those in the poorest and those in the most affluent parts of a single borough in Westminster in London. So it's incredible, right? They'll be known as Chewies, which is quite agreeable. A local GP, or rather local GPs came up with the idea. The council paid for it. So it's a pilot in Pimlico. The NHS is now paying for it. And it means that people turn up on your doorstep. Each worker has responsibility for 120 households. They knock on doors. They build relationships with residents in order to tackle the health problems and social ills, limiting and in some cases destroying lives. I'm going to say that I like it. The detail, the devil is always in the detail. I'm going to say that I like it. So I have got 120 households. How many can I do in a day, do you think? 6, reasonably? I suppose if you're all in a very small part of town, I could probably do more. Let's say 6 in a day, 30 a week. That's once a month I come and see you. Right? I come and see you once a month. We'll talk through what's going on. We'll work out what help you can access. We'll work out what we can do to A, make you healthier, and B, possibly get back to work. And now I've got to loosen my scarf. Because I think if a Tory had suggested this, if a Tory government had suggested this, I'd be with Andrew. And I think wrongly and unfairly, I'd be thinking it sounds like a Gestapo for the health service. So 2 questions. Number 1, what do you think? That's straight off the bat. Immediate response to this story. 0345 6060 973. Question number 2 is, will it work? And in order to answer that question, you need to help me out a bit. Will it work means that you are in that third category that I have somewhat shamefully ignored in recent months. You're not can't work and you're not won't work. You are would work. No, that doesn't work. Makes you sound like a piece of furniture. You are want to work, could work, would work, could work. Sometimes I get a bit bogged down in the sloganeering on them. But you know who I'm talking about because I'm talking about you. Can't work for medical reasons. Won't work because you're part of the largely but not entirely mythical army of malingerers and liars. Woodwork sounds really nice, but I can't keep saying it. It makes you sound like carpentry. I'm calling my listeners carpentry. What did you say? Want work. Want to work. Want to work. But currently can't because reasons. Would this help? Would this work? 0345 6060 973. So for those of us not directly affected by it, what do you reckon? And for those of us perhaps directly affected by it, talk me through what you need. Talk me through why monthly proper support and help. That's a lovely phrase, right? Bring care to the heart of the community. Tackle the sickness crisis. What would it take to get you to work? Good Lord, that's crowdfunding. Someone sent that question in while I was laughing about carpentry. 0345 6060 973. Thank you, Vincent. What do you think would help you? So you are want to work. You're not can't work and you're not won't work. You'll want to work, but currently can't. What would it take to turn you into a can? 0345 6060 973. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This is, in terms of domestic politics and the economy and things we can actually control and we're not enthralled to the Mango Mussolini, I think this is the most important question of our age. This and the smartphones, or at least the social media, particularly among teenagers. The two most important issues of our age are the people who currently aren't working but would like to, but their health won't let them for reasons, But we're not doing the social media today, so you don't need to know about that. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060. You know the rest.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Andrew is currently leading the Listener of the Day competition, which is a new wizard wheeze I've just dreamt up in the last 10 seconds and currently think is a brilliant idea that we should do every day and will almost certainly have forgotten by tomorrow. Any chance of a stinky, a listener? No? Okay. What about if I say please? No? It could be nice though, wouldn't it? Like for best contribution of the day. And a little prize, like a badge or something. Like, I'm James O'Brien's Listener of the Day. Could we do that? No? If it was the newsagents, they'd get a badge. I bet you the newsagents would get a bloody jingle. We'd probably get a full orchestra in to do something for Emily Maitlis and John Sopel and Lewis Goodall if they had an idea that they thought was good and they wanted to get some support for it. Management would be queuing up. They'd be battering doors down to give them whatever they asked for. And cake. I just want a jingle for Listener of the Day and maybe a little badge, a little lapel badge. But no, it'd take years, and by the time it arrives, I'd have forgotten why I wanted it in the first place. But anyway, if I did have that, Andrew would get it today. How much work would a woodwork work if a woodwork could work wood, he asks. Which, to fully appreciate, you had to have heard the last 2 minutes of the last bit of the show, really, didn't you? But hey, you can rewind and pause let's crack on with the conversation. Alison is in Falkirk. Is it a health Gestapo, Alison, or is it the ghost of Aneurin Bevan smiling benignly down from heaven?
It's the ghost of Aneurin Bevan since the year 2000, because I used to work in the NHS as an allied health professional.
Oh, yeah.
And for long enough, we described people who were serial, what we call fail to attend.
Yes.
People who got given appointments and never turned up. And then there were 3 strikes and you were out. And you never got another appointment. Out of the service, your name was crossed off the list if you failed to attend 3 times in a row.
And what do you lose as a consequence of that?
You get nothing. And then what happens?
Well, hang on, I just need to clarify. You lose all your welfare.
No. You lose your access to the service.
You lose all the help that you might have been able to access otherwise.
Exactly.
And that involves you turning up there to get it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And about in the year 2000, we stopped describing these people who struggle as hard to reach,
yes, and
started describing ourselves as hard to access.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. Yes.
So if we think of it that way around, what makes us hard to access? So, for example, for a mental health service, if you suffer from crippling anxiety, yes, and possibly agoraphobia, and also you might not have the bus fare, how are you going to get to your local mental health clinic?
Yes.
So having workers, and doesn't have to be the psychiatrist or the speech therapist, or it has to be somebody who knocks on your door and says, "Hiya, what's stopping you from making things better by accessing
I wouldn't open with that.
Service?"
I wouldn't open with that, Alison. I'd soften them up a bit first.
Soften them. But often, I mean, you can't just pitch up unannounced, obviously. No. But what we found, particularly in the populations, so I mostly worked with children, right, in the populations where children's outcomes were really poor, so we're talking about the attainment gap, we're talking about kids who struggle to string 2 words together.
Yes.
What we found with these families was that it was so difficult for them to get through the day that going to a clinic to see some professional person who probably would speak a language you don't really understand and who would probably criticise you for not looking after your wean very well,
yeah,
didn't work. And what worked much, much better was if we pitched up at your local nursery or playgroup where the families were and helped them to see what kinds of things you could do to make things better. Now, that doesn't work in an adult population because adult populations don't gather in that way.
So you go to the house?
So you'd go to the house.
Is it feasible, 120 on your books?
Yes, it is.
1 visit a month, 6 a day?
Yeah.
And it would just simply help people help themselves?
Yes,
okay,
exactly.
Here's a question. Would you be as warm about this if Ian Duncan Smith or Mel Stride had suggested it?
I was doing it while they were in charge.
But under the Scottish government, surely?
Under the Scottish government,
yes,
true.
Yes.
What we did find, what is true, is that you do have to be aware that it takes longer. So you can see
fewer people because you've got the travel time in between, and unlike private carers, you won't be off the clock when you're travelling. You'll get a daily wage rather than the meter starts when you're in their house and it turns off when you leave. So cautious optimism from you for this, or not even cautious optimism. Optimism.
If we want people to access services, we have to make the services available where they are.
And that would be in the house. I mean, already Lizzie's been in touch. So your current caller is explaining exactly why my partner has been unable to engage with the health services. Crippling anxiety, but he only gets help if he goes to them, which is prohibitive and has made everything so much worse.
Yes.
And there'll be other conditions that this applies to as well. Okay, I like it. And we'll get on to the politics of it and political preferences shortly. But before you go, can I ask you a slightly unexpected question?
You can.
Thank you. How much work would a woodwork work if a woodwork could work wood?
I'm unable to wrap my tongue around that tongue twister.
That makes one of us.
Even as a speech and language therapist.
Yeah, well, exactly that. Hey, physician, heal thyself. Outrageous behaviour from a speech and language therapist. An outrageous comedy from Andrew, which tickled me pink. I squeeze in another. Mike's in Peterlee. It says Yorkshire here. I thought Peterlee was in County Durham.
Oh, it's in the northeast.
Yeah, I thought it was.
Yeah, we're right on the doorstep. We've got like Sunderland, Newcastle. We're a short bus ride away from all the cool places.
Yeah, anyway, we digress. What made you pick up the phone?
I think for many sickness benefit claimants, this policy will be truly terrifying.
Yes, I mean, that is the worry, isn't it? Because you think they're going to come around your house and start bursting balloons behind you in the hope of like spurring you into action that you simply can't undertake.
Yeah, I mean, Ian Duncan Smith had the ideology that you can punish people into being healthy. And it didn't work, to put it mildly. I mean, I myself am now a claimant, but I worked as a benefits caseworker for charities for 20 years.
Right.
And when I hear the idea of healthcare professionals visiting you, I remember what IDS brought in as healthcare professionals. You know, there's examples of healthcare professionals asking claimants, did you catch Down syndrome?
Yeah, but sorry, I talked over you there, and it's a powerful point. When did you catch Down syndrome, or when do you think you might recover from your multiple sclerosis? I've come across concrete examples of this, but this is different. For a start, there's no sanction as far as I can tell, Mike. I want to reassure you, cautiously. So there's no sort of you get punished if you don't improve, or you get punished if you don't engage. And if you're truly not capable of being helped by them, then you wouldn't be on their rounds, I don't imagine.
Well, this is a key point. I mean, working in the business I worked in, whenever there was a new proposal, we'd see the draft regulations because it affected our jobs,
and your dog,
and my dog, and it also affected the claimants that we were working with. So we scrutinised the exact wording of these things, and quite often I find when politicians say help people, what they actually mean is force people.
I sympathise with your cynicism.
Help people
I know.
Work.
Yeah, this is why this is exactly the point I was trying to make about depending on who's announced it. So it's not, I mean, it's a pilot scheme that has so far worked. All right? They're now expanding it to bring in more workers. If you think about things like damp, poverty, worklessness and debt, they are not the responsibility of the health service, really, but they are all things that contribute to your health if left untended. So
what you're talking about is a holistic approach.
Kind of, yeah.
But
all right, let me run you through the pilot.
Personal experience.
This is also personal experience. I know you are sceptical. I don't want you to be, and then you can come back and call me all sorts of names if your cynicism and scepticism turn out to be correct. So here's personal experience among how the trial scheme has helped NHS patients. Right, ready?
Right, go on.
82% increase in cancer screening uptake. And obviously, the more screening you do, the sooner you catch things. The better your chances and the less expensive your treatment. So we can agree that's just good, right? 82% uptake in cancer. Right. 47% increase in vaccinations. Unless you're the current Health Secretary of the United States of America, you'll see that can only be a good thing. 82% increase in the uptake of NHS health checks. So like overall how you're doing, MOTs for the body. That's got to be a good thing as well.
Yeah.
10% drop in hospital admissions. Unless they've all died, that's got to be a good thing as well. And we know that they haven't died because there's been all the other things going on at the same time. 7.3% fall in unscheduled GP appointments, 7% drop in A&E admissions. So if at this point they're not measuring it according to how many people they get back to work, but by how healthy, how much health they improve, can you put your cynicism on hold for a while?
I can. The numbers you're telling me, obviously that's wonderful if that's how it works in practice as a national rollout. The thing I would add, though, if you're out of work, particularly I'd say with mental health, is a big issue. It was identified by, I think it was the Trussell Trust, I could be wrong on that, the fear of the brown envelope is enough to send people into a decline, which is why they changed the colour of the DWP envelope.
That's a great point. I mean, it's like a kind of emotional bill, isn't it? It's like a red reminder.
If you think there's going to be a knock on the door from a healthcare professional, it does feel a little bit.
In the first instance, it absolutely does. It's why words like Stasi and Gestapo have popped up this morning, or even nanny state on steroids. But that's on them, isn't it? So one woman who is quoted in the Telegraph today describes her worker in this field as being like family. You'd have to hire good people, and the prize is longer, happier lives with a side order of increased employability. But I'm with Mike on some of the early worries. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
37 is the time, and this might put our last caller's mind at rest a little bit. The idea of bringing the model to the UK came from Dr. Matthew Harris, who had seen the success firsthand in Brazil, I think. I don't need to check that. But he has been heavily involved in implementing the pilot scheme in Pimlico. And he acknowledges the knock-on-the-door fear. The Englishman's home is his castle point. But the point here is that the workers, the Chewies, as they will be known, get to know their communities, typically visiting residents once a month. Hey, look, my mathematics was correct for once. That's what I said. 6 a day, 30 a week, 120 a month. That's one a month. And building relationships. And it enables you to cut through the vast sums spent by the state. Keir Starmer believes that major savings have to be made in this area of public expenditure, and that doesn't have to involve, I mean, this doesn't defend cuts to people who need money, but this is a different proposal, a different proposition, and everybody involved so far in the pilot and beyond seems to think that it's a very good idea. Recruitment is based on character, not qualifications. So they're looking for empathy, discretion, persistence, life experience, and resilience. The backgrounds of the workforce are varied. There's an Afghan doctor, a paramedic, former volunteers and community workers. One of the case studies explored by the Telegraph today had retired when she took on a voluntary role as a community champion in Westminster before starting the CHWW job. So is this a rare moment for cautious optimism, or have we been here before? John's in Brighton. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, John. James, first-time caller, long-term listener.
Thank you.
Thank you. The scheme worked. I work in the sector.
Go on.
35 years within the fire service.
Yeah.
And then I retired, and then I was asked to come back into the fire service. We have the great ability to go into people's homes without that fear, because we're, for want of a better word, seen as a good guy.
Yeah.
And when we go into people's homes, we've got a responsibility then to look at other areas of their lives to make their life better. So we do dementia awareness, dementia care, falls. We do food banks. And the positive response I get from my customers is overwhelming. how we make their lives so much better.
So you knock on the door. You know that. I mean, you have a fixed round, do you? You have
they're referred into us. They're referred into us from hospital admissions, people coming out of hospital, so we can reduce that bed blocking system.
Yes. So this is like social care. I mean, you're a community health worker, still a volunteer, or are you on the payroll now?
No, I'm on the payroll part-time now.
Brilliant. And so this bit is not linked to being a firefighter, although that puts you in the category of those who've got the right life experiences and attributes to do the work.
Yes.
Okay.
And it does the positive impact that I've had so much great feedback from my clients, customers. I have ongoing visits with them. I take them to food banks, which has an implication for them.
Well, they might not otherwise have gone.
Exactly.
Right, I get it.
Referring them into tea and coffee clubs for that social isolation.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, yeah. It does. Unfortunately, there's not enough office, and the workload is getting more. And
it'll be a postcode lottery as well. But so, I mean, the government making it part of its 10-year plan and recruiting to scale, in your mind, can only be a good thing.
Yeah.
What do you wear? Do you just wear home clothes?
No, I go in uniform. I've got identification. I always phone, text, try and build up a rapport over the phone to start with.
Yes.
So when I get to the front door, they're more than happy to see me.
What's your biggest success? I know I'm putting you on the spot a bit, but can you think of a moment where, a less tough old firefighter than you might have had a little bit of water in his eye?
Yeah. A few years ago, went to see a lady completely socially isolated. Got that word right this time. It was the anniversary of her husband's death.
Right.
So it was a bad day for her. She had no family around her. So we sat down, we broke down barriers with a cup of tea. We then started talking about other bits and bobs. The postman came for a parcel. And I said, would you like me to grab that for you and sign for it? Inside that parcel was a ring that her late husband on his deathbed had got her. Now, I sat there for another couple of hours with her. And I'm not on any time scale at all, but do you know what? If I hadn't been there, to me, that was a bad day. But do you know what? My son said to me afterwards, he said, do you know what, Dad? That was a good day. Oh. That was a good day. And it's just them little things like that.
Company. You're describing
make company.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I take people, I've got leaflets in my van right now of all the local tea and coffee clubs. It's great.
You're bringing care to the heart of the community. And
yeah.
I mean, I may have set it up a bit wrong today by making it sound like it was chiefly and exclusively designed to get people back to work. I mean, in terms of saving money, the priority really would be to reduce the cost to the system of not providing the company that John provides.
Well, I could walk into your house, James, and I could probably highlight trips, flips and falls around your house. Now, you're a young man.
Oh, thank you. It's been a while since anyone called me that, John.
when that comes to an old person who's on their own, that has a huge impact to the NHS, to everything.
You don't know much about shower thermostats, do you, John?
I've got my stepson does.
Oh, really? Oh, well, there you go. Everything. He's got it all covered. You're a lovely man, and you make a really powerful case for the power of this scheme, which is happening in a sense in areas, community health workers, the community health and well-being worker, becoming a national thing. I can see worries, but I think John will probably have assuaged some of the worries of some of the people listening. It's 11:45. I want to talk to Dimitri Grozobinski next. He's our trade negotiations expert, because I'm conscious of the world burning. The FTSE's gone down again this morning. The Asian markets opened in absolute turmoil. The desperate. I found an unhinged headline for it. Should we do that now before we hit? No, we'll do that next. And but I can only really do stuff with you that makes sense, and so much doesn't make sense at the moment that there's not that much we can do. But what we can do is have a look at trade ramifications, trade negotiations, trade treaties, because the Labour government appears to have just arrived somewhere with regard to the United States that almost every government I can remember, certainly every government since Brexit, has been on exactly the same journey.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:48. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the reception is, look, I mean, justifiable worries and fears, but largely warm, with a side order of footballification, which I put my hand up to. If this had been announced by the people that brought you austerity and Brexit, I would be more suspicious than I am at it being announced by the current government. But I just want to credit someone. I never do this. Laura Donnelly, I don't know her, is the health editor of the Daily Telegraph, and she's done a really, really good article about this today. And the sub-editor who came up with the headline, "Health workers sent door to door to bring care to heart of community and tackle sickness crisis." Really done a solid, done a service. If anyone's still read the Telegraph, that would be a really powerful... No, I have to spoil it, don't I? I can't even give a compliment without ruining it towards the end. But there it is. It's a really good piece that I heartily recommend. I know there are paywalls and stuff like that, but if you do have fears about what this might mean for you, this scheme to send workers door to door to help people with their health, I really believe that this article, this special report on page 6 of today's Daily Telegraph, would assuage almost all of your fears. I'm not sure that my next guest is going to be able to assuage almost all of your fears in a rather different sphere. I speak of Dmitry Gorzubinsky, the founder of Explain Trade, the author of the book Why Politicians Lie About Trade and What You Need to Know About It, and our go-to trade negotiations expert on this programme. And Dmitry joins me now. It's hard to know where to start at the moment, but I mean, let's have a little look at this journey, and you brought this to my attention, that Keir Starmer appears to have been on, albeit that he certainly isn't the first UK politician, UK Prime Minister to do so. So he seems to have moved on from "we will have our cake and eat it," by which I mean seeking to sort of open or keep lines of communication and negotiation open with Trump while also preparing for the potential of a new world order. This feels different. We will continue to pursue a deal with the US, but I will only sign deals with the US or anyone else that are in our national interests. And I want to be clear, nothing is off the table. So that means genuinely reciprocal tariffs are on the table, and also that he's not minded to do what Trump clearly wants countries to do, which is to agree to terms that are detrimental to the national interest, to things that are good for him, Trump, but bad for the co-signatories to whatever deal is done. And we have, as you say, been here before. The point is that getting a trade deal is really, really, really difficult, much more difficult than almost all of the media coverage allows, I think. Is that right?
I think every UK Prime Minister faces pretty much the same problem, in that a US trade deal feels like the sort of thing they should be doing. They often have a close relationship with the president. They think about a special relationship. It's a big trading partner. It's in a major economy. So it feels like something they should be trying to get. And it's often something that they promise to get because it's a way of contrasting with their predecessor. My useless former PM didn't get a trade deal, but I am amazing and a good diplomat and wise, and I will get one. The problem they run into, and this isn't exclusive with what's happened in the last week, is that for the most part, the UK economy is already as open to US trade as it can kind of tolerate being. And what that means is that when you want to do a deal with the US, the things that they ask for immediately become painful. They're attacking things like regulations of the way that the UK handles food health and safety or plant health and safety, and that's really sensitive. They look at government procurement in the National Health Service, the way the National Health Service buys drugs or puts drugs on its approved list. All of these kind of things, which are really hard for a UK Prime Minister to do. And so they immediately find themselves having to then kind of backpedal and say, well, actually, having looked at it, maybe we'll only do a deal that makes sense. And we end up exactly where we are today.
All right, well, you've missed out one option, which is to claim that you've signed a deal, albeit that it's only a memorandum of understanding and it means absolutely nothing, which I think Kemi Badenoch did as business secretary with the state of Texas.
I think she did it with a couple of states, and certainly I think in quieter times I can appreciate why that might have been tempting. In fact, I wrote the book on why such things are tempting. But I think right now, with the focus on it, everyone appreciates the difference between something real and something cosmetic.
And the vocabulary is important, Dimitri, because you know what a trade agreement is, but equally a kind of acquiescence, which some countries will almost certainly undertake in the current climate, an acquiescence to the White House's demands might be described as a trade agreement, but isn't actually a trade agreement.
Yeah, so we tend to think of trade agreements as these long-term, binding, comprehensive agreements between countries to improve trade flow, whereas really what you're talking about at the moment is to put a negative spin on it, would be a kind of buying off extortion.
Yes.
In a more positive way, it's kind of trying to shift the focus of the US elsewhere or alleviate the most pressing US concerns. And that is just inherently a lot more transactional and inherently a much more difficult position for a trading partner to be in, because you are facing imminent high levels of tariffs. Whereas normally things are kind of okay and you're just trying to make them a little bit better. You don't feel that same kind of pressure.
Is there anything beyond, and I will use words like extortion and leverage is a bit more gentle. I mean, beyond essentially bending the knee, which I think is a phrase he's used already on social media. I think he might have described a country as bending the knee already. Is there anything Starmer can do to, and its problem is we're talking about Donald Trump. So is there anything a UK Prime Minister can do towards a hostile American president in the arena of trade arrangements? You've already half answered this question. That would mollify the hostile American president?
Look, I think one thing that's really important is no matter what kind of language Donald Trump uses, we should not be getting into thinking of these things in terms of like macho manliness context. That was a problem during the Brexit era. We should not fall into that trap. Any UK Prime Minister should reach out to the US and hear them out. One of the things that gets you into trouble with Donald Trump is when you start bidding against yourself. You start inventing things you think he might want, offering it to him, and he goes, yeah, no, we'll take that, but also. And then you find out his real demands. So Keir Starmer should absolutely engage with the US leadership and go, okay, well, what would it take? The UK has been hit with lower tariffs than just most of its competitive trading partners. So it's quite hard to shift that 10%. The Trump administration seems very wedded to it. But listen, there is absolutely no harm in saying, okay, well, what would it take? And then making a sober, emotionless, pragmatic decision about, firstly, is this a good trade-off? And secondly, if we make this trade-off, will we be back at this table next month as he pockets the gains and just reapplies the pain?
I mean, I'm reading between the lines there as well about what you think he should do, and it's helpful. How does this end, do you think? That's not really a fair question.
Well, eventually we'll all die, James.
Yes. All right, let's track back from
until
there
then,
a bit.
you and I, until then, you and I are going to have the same conversations from 2018, right up until that final moment. I think, honestly, most of this rests on U.S. domestic politics and U.S. markets. You cannot compel Donald Trump to do anything from outside of the United States, and any deal you make with him risks that short-term problem as he invents new grievances or refocuses on something else or simply decides he needs another win. So you can turn the Eye of Sauron away from you for a while, but you can't guarantee it stays off and you're still holding the precious he wants, which is attention and concessions. I'm going to stop that metaphor now for all of our sakes.
I love that metaphor. My precious.
But at the end of the day, what will determine whether we are still in this space a month, a year from now, is how it plays in the US and whether markets continue tumbling. It's his ability to sustain it, frankly.
And uniquely, actually, that among modern politicians, I suppose Boris Johnson might have tried, but as you've just explained, he'd never have been in a powerful position enough to find himself in the position that he's currently in. Whatever Donald Trump does, even if it involves a huge climb down, he can claim that was his plan all along, and MAGA will go with him.
Yeah, listen, absolutely. This is something I frequently say about Vladimir Putin being able to declare victory, retreat from Ukraine, and declare unconditional victory.
Yes,
and
then he has
and say, hey, we did it, guys. Congratulations.
And then we'll have
the Russian Volt.
A big party in Red Square. While I have you, as a an esteemed international trade expert, I draw your attention to Peter Navarro, the top White House trade advisor, and one of his top sources and counsellors, a chap called Ron Vara. Is that someone you've come across before in your work?
This is, for listeners, Peter Navarro is one of Trump's chief advisors on trade, and he wrote a book about trade in which he invented a character who was a China expert, an anagram of his own last name, and agreed with him on everything. And my one regret is that I did not do the same thing. I could have populated my book with dozens of characters from fiction who
You've got loads more letters.
You've
got loads more letters than Navarro as well. It's like you're a walking Scrabble board. It's in 5 of his 13 books.
I mean, there's a serious point to be made here, which is one of the reasons the U.S. markets, world markets, are freaking out right now, is that it does not feel like there is a great deal of seriousness around the president advising him on how to steer the global economy and the largest economy in the world. And that is really, really scary.
Well, thank goodness we've got you, Dmitry Rozubinsky. And as you say, until that dreadful day dawns, we will no doubt talk about this and attendant issues again. And he's right, it is serious. And this is just a wonderful exemplar of 2 things. The first being, how the hell do you do satire when you're dealing with a situation like this? And the second being, the possibility there is no plan. It is just a mad, narcissistic man-child careening around a room, smearing himself with chocolate spread. Because Ron Vara has appeared in 5 of the 13 books written by one of Donald Trump's top White House trade advisors. I can't believe I'm saying this out loud in 2025. He's very anti-China. He whispers anti-China musings in President Trump's ears. And in his book, one of the loudest anti-China voices, quoted as a sort of sage in these matters, is Ron Vara. As Dmitry explained, an anagram of his own surname. And he says things like, you've got to be nuts to eat Chinese food. And only the Chinese can turn a leather sofa into an acid bath, a baby crib into a lethal weapon, and a cell phone battery into heart-piercing shrapnel. It's reported in the New York Times that he is apparently an invention, a creation of Mr. Navarro's imagination. And that is who is in the Oval Office now. That is the kind of man who's saying to Donald Trump, yeah, this is a great idea, you should definitely do it. And Donald Trump says, well, who gave you that idea? And this fellow says, oh, Ron Vara. He's really clever.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Hello. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm reeling from that story. You know when you think you're across something, but this is the nature of our shortened attention spans, isn't it? In the era of social media. I knew that story. That's why I queued it up for Dmitry. So I said, you must have come across this character on your travels, this Ron Navarre. You must be familiar with this. And it was funny, and I thought that'll make a nice bit. Ron Vara, I beg your pardon. And yet hearing Dmitry explain it, a man of obvious intelligence and knowledge, you can't quite believe that it's happening, can you? It gets worse. Rachel Maddow, who is a brilliant broadcaster in the United States of America, still hanging in there. I wonder how much longer that's going to be the case for voices that are critical of the government. But she's done a superb piece. In fact, don't tell her I said this, but I'm beginning to think when I see a Rachel Maddow clip, am I pronouncing her name correctly? Maddow. I'd always say Maddow. I'm sure she says Maddow. I'm Rachel Maddow. She does it straight down the camera. I said the other day, straight down the barrel of the camera, and someone said, it's not a barrel, it's not a gun. That's what we say in showbiz land. I know this because Brian Connolly said it the other day when we were recording Full Disclosure, and he did something straight down the barrel of the camera. She does it straight down the barrel of the camera. So I don't know how much digression I should indulge in here, really. I've got to get a new topic up and running. But I've always had in my mind one listener. I'm only talking to you when I'm on the radio. And the reason why I never look at the camera is because that kind of it almost breaks the spell for me. that I'm talking to. Oh, it's a talking. But if I can start treating the camera like I treat your ears, then it would actually look better on the clips, right? And these clips now, that's all about the clips, baby. It's all about the clips. So I think perhaps, but I can't do the whole show down the camera, can I? Sorry, I can't. I said I can't do the whole show down the can I? That would just be weird. I'd look a bit hypnotised. So do the whole thing like this, just talking straight down the camera. Keith thinks I should. I'm not so sure. I'd like you to tell me what you think. So you can see on YouTube. You can go and watch the whole show on YouTube these days, or just wait for the clips to drop later on Blue Sky. And do we still put the clips on Twitter? We do. Oh, sorry, we still put the clips on Twitter, so you can go and look there, even though you're unlikely to bump into me. Does it actually work better? Does it seem nicer that I'm talking to you rather than sort of, just dreaming around a bit like that? And I might smile more as well if I remember the camera's on. Anyway, we're talking about cameras for a reason. Stop pointing at it now. I'm not going to be able to... Rome wasn't built in a day, all right? I'm not going to be able to suddenly deliver the whole show down the camera in the space of a minute. Also, I've got to turn to the right every now and then to check the time. There's a clock up there as well, but I can still have to turn to the left. Anyway, it's very professional, this. It's not for the first time I thought, perhaps I should do some of this off-air rather than on-air. But you would feel left out if I did that then, wouldn't you? You would feel left out. This is a story about cameras, and it's a really strange one, because I have a feeling that this might be one of those moments where we unearth something quite big that we hadn't really noticed before. And we're not completely unearthing it, because there's usually a story which prompts our conversation. But the conversation I want to have with you is much bigger than the one prompted by this story. I've got a couple of things to say. The first is a really weird phone-in we had some time ago. Weird works, but now normal. When we noticed the incidents, it was paramedics that told us, actually, or at least first response professionals who told us that their lives were being made much harder by people trying to film incidents. So, if you were at an RTA, a road traffic accident, you'd always have the problem of rubbernecking. People slow down to have a look at what's happening. I think that's normal and possibly even natural. But in the early days of YouTube and the rest of it, we noticed that people were now parking up sometimes, getting out of their car and filming the event. The story that prompted it was, I think, a call, and I'm going back a long time now, and my memory is not perfect. I think there might have been and forgive me, this might be a little bit triggering. I think that there was someone was on top of a multi-story car park and possibly contemplating the worst. And I think a police officer, or certainly a local dignitary, really complained about the number of people who were waiting with their phones out filming it. And this is going back a while, because now I don't think that would make news. I think that is dog bites man, isn't it? The idea of something happening and everybody thinking first, RTC, I beg your pardon, it's a collision, not an accident, my bad. Thank you, by the way. Not all pedantry on the programme is unwelcome. I don't think that would merit much of a response now. Do you? The idea that something awful is happening and most people present are getting their phones out. I think it's even happened at terror attacks, and it is an impulse. I've never been in that situation myself, and I don't think I would be one to get my phone out, which probably makes me a rubbish journalist, but you knew that already. I don't even take my phone out at concerts unless my daughter's on stage and I want to send it to her grandma. I've never understood that thing. This isn't what the phone-in's about. I've never understood that thing where you're at a concert watching someone amazing and you're not watching them. You're watching your tiny little screen so that you can watch it again later on your tiny little screen, and you never actually watch the person on the... I don't want to sound like a miserable git. I certainly understand why you want to keep your own little souvenir, and also that the perspective there reminds you of your night, and it's not the same as getting the DVD or whatever you do these days. But I don't think I would be someone to pull my phone out in those circumstances. The reason I'm mentioning this is that the first time we talked about it, what's that figure of speech? It's not like the tip of an iceberg. It was like when you take the lid off something and it explodes. Was there a figure of speech for that? You say the first time we talked about it, It was like lighting the blue touch paper or something like that. And my phones it was like a volcano erupting. Well, not quite, but it's better than what I came up with, Keith. Well done. Thank you for paying attention. And the idea that this is going on a lot and we haven't really acknowledged it. NHS staff are being harassed by patients who are filming them with phones and threatening to post footage online. The union has come forward with this. Thousands of UK health workers revealing that 1 in 7 of them had experienced unwanted and intrusive filming or photography in the past year. This is not exclusively about health workers. That's what I mean by the conversation we have potentially being much bigger than the story that spawned it. I haven't had a phone stuck in my face for some time now. And in some ways, I wasn't doing my job when it was. I've got 2 occasions when it's happened to me. So what I'm thinking of now is you opened a can of worms. That might be better. I think it's a can of worms. And today, Matthew, you are the worms. 0345 6060 973. Because you might be a police officer, you might be a healthcare professional, a GP or a nurse, a hospital doctor, a paramedic. You might be a council worker or a social worker or a bank worker or a shop worker. Any public-facing job makes you vulnerable to somebody sticking a phone in your face because they think it's going to be able to pressure you or intimidate you. That's what I want you to talk to me about. We have Pandora's Box, that works as well. These are all better than Volcano, Keith, honestly. But Pandora's Box, can of worms, all of this works for me because that's what I think might happen. But I need your help. I need you to tell me about the time someone has stuck a phone in your face when you have been trying to go about your work and it was not a pleasant experience. And I'll take anything you've got on this because I think it might be fascinating and I have never seen it in the news before. So this one from the union, the health union, you've got things in hospitals, patients' homes, medical consultations. The footage is being live streamed to relatives who are interrupting and disagreeing, arguing with the diagnoses being given by clinical staff. So what I want from you is the worst examples of a phone being used to either intimidate you or make your job harder. 0345 6060 973. So it's happened to me twice and I wasn't at work technically at the time. One was when I did I did a speech on St Stephen's Green or Parliament Green about second referendum, the big one where everybody was speaking. I think I came on after Steve Coogan or so, the really big one. I couldn't quite believe I was there. I looked out into the crowd and there were a couple of banners up there with my own slogan on it: contempt for the conmen, compassion for the conned. I mean, in retrospect, was it the right thing to do? I don't know. But I did it and I came off and there was one of the EDL types sticking a phone in my face and saying, why don't you do this and why don't you do that? And I just thought, this is ridiculous. He also had like really weird little deposits of white foam in the corners of his mouth. I don't know possibly what causes that, but I pointed it out to him because I felt that if he was planning on uploading this video to YouTube, then he probably wouldn't want weird little deposits of foamy white saliva in the corner of his mouth. And he was very grateful, wiped it away, said thank you, and then suddenly realised that I'd broken the spell of his intimidation. And the other time it happened, I was walking up the Mall and was it the Mall? What's the one where all on the way to the House of Commons, Whitehall? And I got collared by 2 protesters. One I think was an anti-vaxxer and one I think was accusing me of not supporting Black Lives Matter. So I'm not sure which one was more bonkers. And I'm trying to go about my business, walking up there, and they're both sticking phones in my face. And we come to some traffic lights, and I kind of turn it into a tennis match. And I told you this at the time. It feels like a different age, doesn't it? And so in the end, they're sort of filming each other, filming me. And I'm sitting there like a tennis umpire, moving from one to the other. And I said something like, why don't you have a chat with each other? Like compare notes or compare tactics. And the guy accusing me of not supporting Black Lives Matter sort of peeled away. And the guy accusing me of being part of an international paedophile conspiracy, that was it. It was when they were saying that that pizza restaurant in Washington had a paedophile ring in the basement. Do you remember? All the Donald Trump supporters were saying that, and he claimed that stuff was going on in this country that was exactly the same. And I said to him, and I don't think he ever uploaded this, I hope he did, I said to him, if there is really an army of paedophiles running the country, do you not think perhaps your time would be better served going to get them? rather than harassing me in the street. I don't know anything that you're talking about. Why are you wasting all your time filming people like me when you could be out there doing, the really important work? And bless him, you could see the sort of realisation dawn across his face that if the enemy he was describing to me was real, then the best way of fighting it was probably not to be doing to me what he was doing to me. 12:16 is the time. All of which leads me to this question. All right, and it's actually a very serious question. You are doing your job. One of the people you are charged with dealing with or helping, not necessarily helping, but you are dealing with, and I know what you might be thinking, cabin crew on an airline. Oh man, that must be terrible. We get this constantly, says somebody who's asked me not to name them. People film absolutely everything, good and bad, medical situations, aggressive passengers, crew response to difficult situations, how we address them, ladies and gentlemen rather than everyone, delays, crew appearances. I've even had conversations with passengers about why they're filming, and they either claim it's for their own safety in case anything happens, or it's to pass on to the newspapers or the media. I know it sounds to some people like an old bloke has just discovered the internet, but that's not what this is. This is prompted by the union, the health union, saying that their members are having their lives made much worse by phones, webcams, and even hidden devices, accompanied by threats to intimidate staff or as bargaining tools to have medication prescribed. So if you don't give me more medication, drugs, I'll put this up on YouTube. That kind of thing. But I want anything you've got, that you are doing your job. How much harder does your job become now that members of the public are always pulling phones out of their pockets, filming you and threatening to go to the media or stick it all on YouTube? Hit the numbers now, you will get through, okay? 0345 6060 973. The headline, NHS staff filmed doing job is harassment. Tell me why you agree that it is. It might sound innocuous, it might sound mild, but it is actually harassment because it makes your job considerably harder to do. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 12 is the time. So you know what I'm talking about. We do public consultations for renewable energy. It's not exactly what you'd think as the cutting edge of controversy. And we are always intimidated by angry people filming on phones. It's the anti-renewables climate change deniers who are doing it, and the harassment is off the charts. I'm a firefighter. Virtually every time we are in attendance at anything people would consider exciting, out come the phones, and they are all recording us. It was only yesterday I was covering, and again, this is pretty grisly, a person under a train, and I could see people filming us down on the tracks from the bridge. I don't understand what people do with this footage. They stick it online for money, I presume, or for attention. But I'm more interested, this is it, secondary school teacher. I've been filmed by kids in the class who have then posted it on TikTok and by parents during parents' evening. That's what I want, the idea of the phone almost being used as a weapon and being stuck in your face. So NHS staff being harassed by patients who are filming them with phones and threatening to post footage online. Police officers perhaps trying to do their job but being treated, it's almost an element of guilty until proven innocent. Why? And it is intimidating, and I think it qualifies as harassment. And any area where this goes on, any public facing job. What about working in a supermarket? And anything, someone tries to annoy you and film you while you get annoyed so that they can hit you with a massive gotcha. I'll take anything you've got. I just find this, I can't believe it's the first time I've seen a story that touches upon this phenomenon and this idea of it being something in the new normal. And you're right. I know journalists, it's a great point from Jonathan, offer money for clips, but I'm not thinking about a clip of an event that a news crew would film. Okay, that was the last thing we did. That was the phone-in we had quite a while ago when we were in the arena of still being surprised by some of the things that, what we'd call it, a universal media was making us do. This is about people doing their job and having that job rendered much harder by people sticking phones in front of you. So it's not like Rodney King or George Floyd. It's like a doctor being threatened, if you like. I mean, teachers would be the best example. How wide does that go? How far does that spread? And a kid has filmed you, possibly secretly in class, when you're disciplining another kid. It's not normal. but it has, I suspect, become so. So you get your ducks in a row on that one. 0345 60 60973 is the number you need to join in. This is a good one. I'm a housing officer for a large registered social landlord in London. It's normal to be filmed. I don't like it at all, but I accept that it's part of modern life. It cuts across both of your topics today, actually, James, because I do solo home visits to vulnerable residents, many of whom have complex issues and lives which prevent them from working. And they don't always welcome somebody like me coming into their life. I don't feel safe, and sometimes I feel intimidated in a way I don't feel when I'm having meetings in the office. But if you've got the phone in your face, then I just suspect that makes absolutely everything worse. 0345 60 60973 is the number you need. Now, as promised, the brilliant Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, I think she's come back briefly to cover the first 100 days of Trump, so she'll be off again soon, manages to do a much better job than I did of explaining the latest madness to emerge from the White House. It involves the top White House trade advisor, so these will be the people that were encouraging Donald Trump to go ahead with his ludicrous tariff plan. And this one, Peter Navarro, has, well, just have a listen to this, because I think she nails it even more effectively than me and Dimitri managed to. And that is the tale of a White House trade advisor inventing an expert in 5 of his 13 books, in which he sort of offers up supportive quotes, despite, as another journalist or another academic established, someone called Tessa Morris-Suzuki, an emeritus professor at Australia National University, has established that he doesn't exist. She became so concerned about all these statements on China that she started trying to find him, and discovered that he was apparently an invention of the fellow that Donald Trump now trusts with his trade policies. 26 minutes after 12 is the time. And I've got one other thing to share with you before we get stuck into this question of having a camera stuck in your face while you're going about your work. And it is, exactly as I predicted, an unhinged headline.
Unhinged headline.
Am I alone in admiring what Trump is doing? That was what I said to you someone in the Daily Telegraph would have done. Am I a wombat, or is he actually doing good work? And it is perhaps inevitably Tim Stanley in the Daily Telegraph today who offers up the question, am I alone in admiring what Trump is doing? To which I think, apart from Ron Vara, the invented contributor to the Trade Advisors books, the answer is yes, you are. And Trump himself has been asked questions about what is going on at the moment, to which he has responded in characteristic fashion.
Is there a Trump put, though? Is there pain in the market at some point? You're unwilling to tolerate this idea of a Trump put? Is there a threshold?
I think your question is so stupid. I mean, I think it's I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something, and we have such a horrible. We have been treated so badly by other countries because we had stupid leadership that allowed this to happen. They took our businesses, they took our money, they took our jobs, they moved it to Mexico, they moved it to Canada, they moved a lot of it to China, and it's not sustainable. We're not going to do it. Now we have hundreds of billions of dollars is pouring into our country on a monthly basis. It's pouring. It's already started because I put tariffs on, and eventually it's going to straighten out, and our country will be solid and strong again.
On the tariffs, is it a negotiation now? Bloomberg, sir. Is it a negotiation or rules of the road?
Go ahead. Another question, please. Sir,
It's incredible, but on it goes. Completely ignoring Bloomberg, which was a really good question about whether it's a negotiation or something rather worse. But that idea that there's a narrative of victimhood, isn't there? There's always a narrative of victimhood in these interventions, is that people are hurting us and so we're going to hurt them, which might work until you look at some of the countries that he's planning to hurt the most, which include some of the poorest countries on the planet, and of course islands that are inhabited exclusively by penguins. Ricky's been in touch. I'm an HGV driver. A colleague had a heart attack at the wheel last week. His trunk went off the road into a field. It was all smashed up. It was on TikTok in no time at all, passing drivers, to the point where the company had to post a Facebook message explaining the situation. People are so dumb. I get that, though. That's just the equivalent of slowing down for a traffic collision. And now these days, in the modern world, getting your camera out, it used to be just that they would slow down. What I'm interested in next is the actual interference with your ability to do your job. So whether you're in a hospital, a doctor's surgery, whether you're going about your business as a police officer, a council worker, possibly even in retail, somebody gets their phone out almost as a kind of, what's the word I want? Not a weapon quite, but as a threat. They stick it in your face and expect you to behave differently as a consequence. It's 12:30. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 33 minutes after 12. Across to Sam in Westminster shortly, but I wonder whether I'm showing my age here. I've got to tell you, most people seem to be less troubled than I am by the prospect of having a camera shoved in your face. Maybe I've been coloured by my own experiences. This is interesting from Jumaid. I think if people are not doing anything wrong or illegal, then they do not need to worry about being filmed. On the contrary, it just helps the public have faith that things are being done right. But why are you doing it? And also, as he says, if you're dealing with the police, then you might need camera evidence to protect yourself. And a lot of you are reminding me of George Floyd, which I didn't think was relevant to this conversation, but maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it is. Sam is in Westminster, and I think coming at it from that side of the conversation rather than the one that I started on. Sam, what made you pick up the phone?
So I've got a YouTube channel, James, and I make a living going about and filming predominantly police officers, but public servants conducting. He's doing their job, essentially. And obviously I'm coming from the other side, where I think that place and time where I think it's beneficial and it should be done, and I think people in public service should expect it to happen as part of sort of oversight from the public.
Where did the idea come from? When did the idea occur to you?
So I used to watch other people making similar type of content, and I felt that I could sort of add something to the conversation. I've also got a background in journalism myself, and I decided to give it a go, and my social media sort of stuff sort of picked up a lot of steam really quickly, and it sort of went from there.
Don't you need man bite dog moments for it to work? Are you hoping for a gotcha? Because it's interesting that you mentioned a background in journalism, because reading some of the messages that have just come in, I did find myself wondering whether I was sounding a bit legacy media. And why do you have less right to march around the place with a camera than somebody who is working for a more traditional media organisation marching around the place with a camera? And of course, also the traditional media organisations put up requests for footage. So what do you consider to be a win? When do you think to yourself, I'm really glad? What works best? Well, look, I'm going to be brutal about it. What kind of footage do you make the most money from?
So you sort of hit the nail on the head when you said the sort of gotcha moments. Those are the ones that tend to sort of go viral really, really quickly.
Yeah.
But ultimately, my ultimate aim is to go to highlight sort of public services.
But give me an example. Give me an example of a gotcha moment. Give me an example of something that one of your wins.
Moment. I wouldn't call it a win because I don't think.
Well, financially,
it's a win. But financially, an example would be I filmed a police station where I was stopped and searched officers who misused terrorism legislation to conduct that stop and search.
Yeah.
And they were ultimately sort of, they had to, I can't say that they were found liable, they settled out of court. Video as well garnered, I think it was nearly 500,000 views. That was probably one of my best performing videos. So you're right, those sort of moments are the sort of moments that people tend to sort of gravitate towards.
And you provoked that exchange. You went along. But you went there hoping that something like that would happen.
No, my ultimate aim is to go and highlight our public services.
But what were the police doing? What were the police doing at the time?
The officer in question was heading in to begin a shift while I was filming a police station.
Yeah.
And she's seen me.
So you'll know that I'm in an area I don't know a lot about. Do you call yourself an auditor, Sam?
Yeah.
Right. So as a police officer trying to go to work. Tell me about that interaction. How did you prevent him from going into work?
prevent the officer from going to work at all.
So he did go into work then? So you're filming outside a police station and he comes up and says, what are you up to?
Essentially, yeah.
That's what you're hoping for?
Necessarily, no. As I say, my ultimate aim is
you must be hoping. I just want to get a better understanding of it, because if I went to a police station and started filming and I made my money from putting exchanges up on the internet of police officers doing things, I'd be gutted if no one came up to me and asked me what I was playing at.
Not necessarily, because I still publish videos where stuff like that doesn't happen.
So just uninterrupted footage of a police station.
So
you can't get much. There can't be much.
I could be highlighting several things. You know, like if you want to let me answer, I'll answer your questions, James. But I don't just do police stations. I'll go to council buildings. I'll highlight local services that are in the area that might relate to people that watch my content. I get messages from people that say, "Oh, because of your video, it's sort of signposted me towards a specific service." So it's not just about sort of getting the initial interaction. And as you sort of highlighted earlier, the media landscape's completely changed. Legacy media, unfortunately, is becoming less and less relevant, and people are turning to alternative sources for not just news, but other forms of information. And the stuff that I publish is a form of that.
But you are, in a way, wasting police time.
Oh, because I don't go about approaching police officers.
No, but you stand outside police stations hoping that they approach you.
Necessarily, it's the.
Well, I don't want to have a row. I struggle to understand what you're doing there if you're not hoping that they're going to come up to you and say, "What are you doing here?" I mean, I would if you were outside my house, and if you were outside my office, someone might come. It wouldn't be me, but someone might come up to you and say, "What are you doing?" And that police officer could have been going to start his shift. He could have been doing something really important.
I appreciate what you're saying, but ultimately, in public servants are accountable to the public.
I understand that.
There should be a reasonable expectation.
No, but it's the moment. I just want to
some form of scrutiny.
I agree with all of that. If you thought they were doing something wrong, then it would be really important to expose them to scrutiny. But they're not doing anything wrong. You're there hoping that they do. By your rationale, we can't then go and see how our tax money is being spent unless a police officer is somehow doing something wrong. No, I'm not. I'm not getting it, and it might be my fault. But you're standing outside a police station filming it, and if you then go home and no one has come up to you and said, "Why are you doing this?" You've wasted your day.
Certainly no.
Well, you keep saying not necessarily, but I asked you what your biggest success was, and it was the time you were standing outside a police station filming it, and a police officer came up to you.
And I accept that those gotcha moments are very
but they're your livelihood.
They perform very well.
And that
not
police officer.
No,
you keep saying you've got to stop saying not necessarily.
You keep interrupting me, James.
I don't. No, you finished all your sentences. Yes. Well, just answer me this: why are you there filming a police station when there's no people around?
Because people want to see how our tax money is being spent, see what local services are available. The other thing I like to point out, police station by police station, borough by borough, parts of the country, it differs in terms of what sort of policing priorities they have. So that's something I like to bring to the attention for the public to see what different sort of locations, what their different policing priorities. And I maintain it's not just police stations I cover everything from councils to foreign embassies to a whole multitude of different sort of services that people like to watch and sort of see what is going on.
To see whether or not anyone comes along and interrupts you. It sounds like a very odd. So if everyone ignored you, you wouldn't make any money at all.
Because there's countless videos that I've put up that perform reasonably well.
We've all got videos that perform reasonably well. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's something we should be proud of. It sounds to me like you're trying to provoke a reaction from police officers in the hope of monetising it when you put it up online. But I guess not necessarily, eh? Dale's in Harrow. Dale, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I am a police officer myself, and I actually am very familiar with your last caller and his videos.
Oh, are you? So what does he do exactly?
Well, exactly the kind of interaction you just had with him is exactly the kind of interaction he mostly gets.
So he's trying to provoke a reaction, and then when people who, I mean, in your line of work are under a lot more stress than I am, possibly react, it's a jackpot for him because he'll stick it on social media and everyone will tell him what a mensch he is.
Yes, and he is right in terms of he does it at police stations, council buildings, And 9 times out of 10, you will get spoken to by either a police officer, security, etc.
Because it could be a terror threat if you're filming place of...
Well, I mean, exactly. If someone's going to stand outside a police station, police officers are naturally nosy anyway.
Yes.
You're going to get spoken to, and, and then until that suspicion's allayed, it depends on what avenue it goes down.
Yes.
But the reason... Sorry to interrupt you. The reason I called was just to explain that this culture of filming is I'd say if I stop 10 people, maybe 6 or 7 of them will get their phones out and trying to intimidate you. I mean, me personally, it doesn't bother me. I know some officers it does, and they don't like being filmed, and it does antagonise the situation.
There's a middle ground here, isn't there? I mean, on the one extreme, you've got people who are clearly, however much they want to cast themselves as citizen journalists, they're hoping to make money from getting disturbed while behaving weirdly. And then on the other extreme, you've got police officers doing bad things. And I do actually think I was wrong to dismiss the early messages about George Floyd, because had there not been people there with a phone, and I know that was in the United States of America, but I think it merits a mention. Had there not been people there with cameras, actually, we'll go back to Israel, Dale, and I bet you weren't expecting that when you rang in.
No, definitely not.
If that fella whose phone was found in his pocket after he was killed by the IDF hadn't been filming what was going on, the IDF wouldn't have been forced to admit their, quotes, mistake, end quotes, when it came to how 15 paramedics had been killed. So I can see a case.
I think the issue is, James, it's not that people film. It's because I understand some people genuinely don't trust the police, and I can understand that. Obviously, I'm not going to go into everything, but I can understand that in this day and age. However, for example, say I stopped you, for example, on the street, and for whatever reason, say I was going to be a stop and search, and for whatever reason, me and you ended up in a scuffle.
Yes. And perish the thought, Dale.
Yeah, but
it wouldn't take you long. It wouldn't take you long to bag me up, mate. I don't think.
No, but I'm saying, for example, say I'm with a colleague and we're trying to get you into handcuffs.
Yes.
2 people on one. From the outside looking in, it looks oppressive. It looks aggressive.
Yes.
However, that's probably the safest way to get you in a controlled situation,
and
where
that's
we can
unhelpful.
do what we need to do. But however, someone will film 30 seconds of that interaction, not knowing what's happened before, post it online. So to someone not knowing the context, it looks like 2 police officers just beating you up for no reason.
And to use my examples, and perhaps to tie it in with Sam, when people came up to me after the Brexit speeches, or when they stop me and I'm walking up Whitehall and accuse me of all sorts of things, if I respond in a stressed or even verbally violent, angry fashion, that's a jackpot for them. They get a result.
Yeah.
So
that's what it is. A lot of it is the I got you moments. Or
I thought so.
For example, if I'm talking to you and I stumble on my words or I get a little bit of something wrong, then that's it. It's they've got what they needed, and try and make me and all my colleagues look like idiots. And that's what it is.
Yeah, of course it is. I think that's pretty clear to me now. Thank you, Dale. 12:46 is the time. That's not what I wanted when I started this conversation, but it's turned out to be unexpectedly interesting. I was more interested. Perhaps we shouldn't have opened it up beyond health workers. I'm glad that we did, because I think the tension there is pretty clear. You turn up somewhere hoping to provoke a response, you get a response, it's a result. You can kid yourself till you're blue in the face that you're doing something worthy or valuable. But the idea of a doctor or a nurse or a healthcare professional being put in this position, I think is less nuanced, isn't it? It is clearly not going to be helpful. 12:46 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time. I had this as a paramedic, James writes Michael, treating the seriously ill and injured with a camera in your face. It's not a single topic, this, is it? I think I got that wrong. I'd have thought that, particularly perhaps for young black victims of frequent stop and searches, there might well be a reason why you would get your phone out. It's the difference between a deliberate provocation, which is my only experience of this kind of thing, albeit that it's been a while, and what you might describe as self-protection. So if you're going out with your phone hoping to find some footage, you're doing something very different from pulling your phone out when you find yourself in an encounter with an authority figure. And then there are people who know that you can just make money from filming things, whether it is something grisly, something grim, or the aftermath of a tragedy or a horrible accident. Social workers are an area of interest as well. Elaine says that they're constantly being recorded. But again, we know that people in jobs where we expect them to be good sometimes do bad things. So it's a lot more nuanced than I had anticipated. 12:50 is the time. Here's a good example of what I was trying to articulate from Marv, who's in Brentwood. As a black person, if the police make contact with me, the first thing I'm going to do is whip out my phone and start recording. It's not for any jackpot moment or payout, James. It's because the police just act very differently when they know that they're on notice. And yet, of course, if I stumble across some footage of a police officer apparently behaving appallingly towards a member of the public, I don't know what has immediately preceded it. And you can easily say, well, they should never behave like that. And that's true. But you'd want to know what the provocation was, wouldn't you? Before you concluded that they were in deserving of your disapproval or disgust. I don't know. Jason's in Croydon. Jason, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Good to speak to you.
Likewise.
So what we haven't covered, I mean, you covered it in your point just now, the alarming numbers of black males and females now that are stopped and searched, arrested, and then come to harm while in police custody. If you don't film that initial interaction when you're being questioned and stopped and searched, when normally you've been profiled, then what the police officer says is what goes. You're just a civilian. And so the power dynamic has not been examined there. You need to...
Have you always felt this way? Have you always felt this way?
Have I always felt... I'm a young black male.
Yes.
I'm a young black male. I don't need to feel this way. I just need to look at the statistics, and I need to look at the evidence of black males coming to harm while in police custody. Then, hang on, James. Sorry to do
Go
that.
on. That's all right.
Yep. So then when you get to the station, and I've not been arrested, but when you get to the station, the police officer says, he did this when we engaged with him, so we arrested him.
Okay.
He used reasonable force. He happened to suffer from asthma. We were on his chest for a while. When he got to the police station, we didn't get a doctor. He died.
And you can prove that his version of events is incorrect. I mean, I don't know how helpful.
How would you prove that his version of events is correct?
No, I hear you. I get it. There's a distinction, isn't there, between using it as a mode of defence and using it as bait almost to try and tempt.
No. It's just sorry. I know the caller you had before, and whatever he does to make money on the internet is his business. But what I'm talking about is you're just making a record of what happened when the police engaged me while I was going about my lawful.
And you don't even have to say anything.
Right. So, and there's a second point here.
Have you done it yourself?
Have I done what?
Filming in an engagement with the police.
I filmed young black males being engaged with the police.
Okay.
As a member of the public walking by and thinking.
And you don't say anything. You just pull your camera out.
I've got every right to.
No, I know. I'm just clarifying the detail.
I'm a black male.
Yes.
If I see young black males who are often profiled being engaged by the police, I will stop my car, my route if I'm walking, and film them. And I will tell those young black males, I'm not interfering with what the police are doing. I'm here just for your support, young men.
And how do the police treat you?
They treat me however they want. They can say to me, "Move away, sir. Don't film."
No, I know, but what usually happens? What usually happens?
They do nothing about it. We'd prefer you not to film, and I'd say I've got every right to film. Yeah. Or I'd be facetious and say I'm bird watching. I'm an ornithologist, so I'm filming up there. That's what I would do. Now, the other thing that you didn't cover is it's not illegal to film. And by the way, police film. And since police have been filming with their on-vest cameras, how many times and it's obviously a rhetorical question, how many times have they been turned off? Cameras been off? Oh, it was off. It wasn't working. Oh, and then we've got all sorts of questions unanswered or cannot be answered other than by the version of events that the police give you. What happened while that camera was coincidentally turned off? I mean, situations I'm talking about relate specifically to black males and ethnic minorities and black women and ethnic minorities. George Floyd is in that, and we're not in America yet.
No, but we are in a country where the Metropolitan Police has been found to be institutionally racist on a number of occasions. And I know it was rhetorical, but I would be interested in the numbers of the number of times how often the body-worn camera has turned out to be off. It's a much bigger topic than I realised this. I thought it was just going to be a simple kind of can of worms, take the lid off, and this has happened to me and that's happened to me. But it is yet another collision of modern technology and traditional attitudes. And I can't really fault anything that Jason has said. I mean, because you live in a country where we know that people are targeted because of their ethnicity and age. And to challenge that involves recording it. We return to the story that we started the programme with today. Leilana Malana Allen is a special correspondent for PBS NewsHour and is just going to return our attention to this story that has broken over the weekend about the IDF being compelled to change their account of how 15 Palestinian medics ended up dead. The original claim that they had emergency lights on and that they didn't have any emergency lights or even headlights on. What's the latest, Layla? The lights were clearly on because the footage has been found.
They were, and this is kind of backed the IDF into a corner about the fact that they have, whatever the other circumstances of other attacks where similar things have been accused, they very clearly lied in this situation. And there are accusations that they have done so because they have been allowed to either lie or not respond to accusations of killing medics in other situations. I've been working across Israel and the Palestinian territories as well as in Lebanon over the last year and a half through these IDF attacks. And we have consistently seen medics and hospitals coming under fire and really nothing being done. And many people are saying because they haven't been held to account about the fact that these are protected classes in wartime, that's why they felt they could lie about this. They essentially said that these vehicles approached suspiciously and that they didn't have any lights or warning signals on, and they weren't branded with any sort of medical information. We know now that it's not true. When Palestine Red Crescent Society volunteers and the UN finally went to the site last week, they found a sandy mound, and when they dug through it, they found a destroyed UN vehicle, multiple destroyed ambulances, 15 bodies, at least one of which had its hands tied behind their back. Within that group, half of them were civil defense volunteers, half of them were paramedics from the ambulances, and one was a UN employee. Now, this is not an airstrike. They were responding to an airstrike. The first two ambulances went to try and help people from that airstrike. The first one managed to take people to hospital. The second one disappeared. Volunteers from that ambulance then called in to ask other ambulances to come for help. One of the volunteers from that ambulance was taken out. His hands were tied and his face was put into the ground by the soldiers. And he watched as multiple of his colleagues who arrived into hails of gunfire were tied and bound, were killed individually. So this isn't an airstrike where one can say this happened accidentally, it was unfortunate, it was a mistake. Each person here died individually.
And without this footage being discovered, the original version of events would have gone
exactly
largely unchallenged. I know I'm going to run out of time, Layla. Sorry. I know that there is that there's been a press conference while I've been on air this morning. I think some more evidence has emerged subsequently. So the president of the Palestinian Red Cross Society directly contradicting official Israeli claims now with I'd have thought, little prospect of pushback.
Exactly that. It has become clear that this case at least was lied about. And what that new evidence is that one volunteer who managed to escape has come back and given his account, as well as that phone footage they found on the phone of a dead medic, which has now been sent to the UN. So an official UN complaint is now being made. So this is going to be escalated.
And, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu on his way, if not already, in the Oval Office. Thank you, Layla Malana Allen, special correspondent for PBS NewsHour, with developments on that story that we covered last week with a sense of suspicion, shall we say, and it turned out to be rather well justified. And that is, of course, having spoken to an eyewitness. Nothing personal. That's it from me for another day. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.